After my heart checkup at the hospital, I returned to the parking lot and froze. An envelope was tucked under my windshield wiper, and the handwriting belonged to my wife, the woman I had buried 2 years ago. Before I could touch it, her former kidney doctor suddenly appeared, grabbed my wrist, and whispered, "Don't go home yet." My hands shook as I opened it. Inside wasn't a farewell letter, but a legal guardianship petition filed under my name. And the person asking the court to control my life was my own son. That envelope, the one sitting under my wiper blade, bore my wife's handwriting, the wife I put in the ground 2 years back. I was still standing in the UPMC Presbyterian lot, January, cold knifing right through my coat eyes, fixed on my own name, rendered in Nadine's unmistakable script. The black ink hadn't faded. The paper itself looked freshly sealed. That was the part that made no sense at all. 68 years old, a bum ticker requiring check-ins every 3 months, I'd long since shaped my life around predictability. Decades as a bridge inspector will do that to a man. You start seeing everything through the lens of tolerances and load limits, stress points and margins. Every Tuesday afternoon, the cardiology suite, the familiar examining table, the same rotation of questions about tightness in the chest, and whether the breath still came easy, and then the same measured verdict that nothing had shifted. "Your heart's holding up fine, Mr. Drummond," my cardiologist had told me not 40 minutes before. 3 months, same as always. I'd taken my paperwork, given a nod, and looped the long way back through the nephrology wing on my way out. That detour was never random. Nadine had lived out her last year in that wing anchored to a dialysis chair, 3 sessions every week, while her kidneys gave out, and we both kept up the quiet fiction that things might yet turn around. The corridor still held the smell of antiseptic and the bitter tea she had refused to stop drinking, no matter what it cost her worn-out system. 8 separate visits since we buried her. 8 times I'd gone past the bay where she used to sit. Each time I told myself the ache would be a little lighter. It wasn't. Grief, though, grief I knew how to carry. It had a shape, a weight I'd grown accustomed to. An envelope in Nadine's own hand, materializing on the hood of my truck, had no such shape. My fingers made contact with the paper. It felt solid, real. I started to pull it free, and then a voice came from somewhere behind me. "Mr. Drummond, wait." I turned around. Dr. Alden Forsyth. 58 temples gone silver, but the eyes still precise and alert, was standing roughly 10 feet off in the physician parking section. He had been Nadine's nephrologist all through her final year of dialysis treatments. "Welcome back to His Hidden Revenge. If this is your first time here, I'm glad you found your way. These are stories about ordinary people who faced extraordinary betrayal and found the strength to stand back up. If stories like this speak to you, consider staying close. There are more where this came from." Before we go further, I want to ask you something simple. When you think about the people who shaped your sense of right and wrong, was it one clear moment that defined them, or a lifetime of quiet choices? Drop your answer below. I read everyone. A note before we begin: some details in this story have been shaped for the purpose of storytelling, and any resemblance to specific real individuals is purely coincidental. What matters is the truth at the heart of it. I hadn't laid eyes on him since the memorial service. Dr. Forsyth. "Don't open that yet," he said, moving toward me at a clip, his breath coming out in small clouds against the cold. "There's something I need to tell you first." I glanced down at the envelope, then back up at him. How is this possible? Nadine has been gone for 2 years. "I know." He stopped alongside my truck, studying my face, the way a doctor looks for symptoms. "She left it in my keeping, left very precise instructions about when it was to be delivered." The lot suddenly felt vast and hollow. A car alarm chirped somewhere 3 rows over. A door banged shut in the distance. "When to deliver it?" I repeated, drawing the words out. "What does that mean?" "Your wife set up a protocol 2 months before she passed." Dr. Forsyth's tone was measured clinical. "She told me that if anyone ever contacted us requesting your medical records for legal purposes, specifically your cognitive capacity records, I was to flag it at once and put this letter in your hands." The wind kicked up. The envelope trembled against the wiper blade. "Someone called?" "Last Tuesday," he said. "It wasn't a routine inquiry. The hospital records department flagged it as unusual. Your primary physician has never received a formal capacity request about you, but someone asked for documentation of your mental competency, what they described as legal purposes." When the request landed on my desk for review, I remembered Nadine's instructions. At 68, I had assessed thousands of bridges and arrived at one hard truth. When the footing shifts under a structure, you feel it right away. The way a tension cable goes slack a half beat before the deck begins to move. The way a crack opens in concrete with a pattern that says, the load just redistributed catastrophically. I was feeling that shift now. Who requested them? My voice came out flat like it belonged to a stranger. The request originated from a law firm, elder law specialists. Dr. Forsyth drew a folded sheet from his coat. Kettner and Associates. They stated they were assembling documentation for a guardianship petition. Guardianship. The word struck me like something dropped from height. I don't need a guardian. I'm not incompetent. I know that. Your wife knew it too. He held out the sheet a photocopy of the records request. But she also knew someone might try to argue otherwise. That's why she put this in place. Put what in place? A warning system. Dr. Forsyth nodded toward the envelope. She was very clear about it. If this specific trigger occurred, a legal inquiry into your capacity, I was to get her letter to you immediately. Before you went home. Before you spoke to anyone. She said timing would be everything. My hands had gone cold. The envelope sat right there inches from my fingers, holding words Nadine had set down on paper, knowing she'd be gone by the time I read them, knowing something was coming that I hadn't seen. How long have you been holding on to this? Since April 2020, 22 months. Dr. Forsyth's face softened. I'll be honest, I thought it was the medication talking. Kidney failure affects cognition toward the end. I assumed she was frightened, maybe fixating on something that only made sense in her own mind. I kept the letter because she asked me to. I never imagined I'd actually... He stopped. I was wrong. She knew something. I pulled the envelope free from the wiper blade. The paper was heavier than it appeared. My name on the front, Gerald Drummond, in the deliberate script she reserved for things that mattered. She had been an accountant for 38 years. Nothing she wrote was ever careless. I broke the seal. One page. Her handwriting black ink dated April 14th, 2020, 6 weeks before she died. My dearest Gerald, if you are reading this, someone has requested documentation of your mental capacity for legal proceedings. Dr. Forsyth has followed my instructions, which means the threat I feared is now active. Do not go home. Do not answer your phone. Drive immediately to Vivica Langford's office. She is my personal attorney, and she's been holding documents for this exact situation. I know you don't understand yet. You will trust Vivica. Trust the protections I built. And Gerald, I am so sorry I had to leave you before I could stop this myself. They are doing it again. All my love, Nadine. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely keep hold of the page. These same hands had signed her death certificate 24 months prior. These same hands had scattered her ashes at North Shore Riverfront Park, where we used to walk together. Mr. Drummond, Dr. Forsyth's voice reached me from somewhere far off. Are you all right? I read the last line one more time. They are doing it again. Who was they? What was it? And how had my wife died already knowing I would need this warning? Already knowing she'd have to build something that would spring to life from beyond the grave. I need to make a call, I said, my voice barely holding. The attorney, Dr. Forsyth, asked. I gave a single nod, still staring at Nadine's signature, the careful loops, the firm pressure of a woman who knew precisely what she was committing to paper. Then go now, he said quietly. She said timing would matter. I drove to Gulf Tower in a kind of fog, Nadine's letter resting on the passenger seat beside me. Downtown Pittsburgh sat gray and cold under a January sky, all glass and steel. I parked underground and rode the elevator to the 14th floor. The attorney had been waiting 23 months. Nadine had known almost to the day when I'd arrive. Vivica Langford, 58, silver-haired with her hair drawn back in a precise bun, rose from behind her walnut desk as I came in. She had served as Nadine's personal attorney for 22 years, and the calm she carried had the settled quality of someone who had won difficult battles before. Mr. Drummond, she said, extending her hand, your wife knew you'd come today. I was still gripping Nadine's letter, 2 years dead, and she'd known exactly what would send me here, because she had known what would trigger my call to Dr. Forsyth. Vivica gestured to a leather chair. Please sit. We have a great deal to cover. Floor-to-ceiling windows behind her looked out over the Allegheny River, cold and flat under the winter sky. Everything had an unreal quality to it. You received Nadine's letter, Viveka said. I set it on the desk. She wrote about a threat, about them doing it again. I don't understand what that means. You will. She unlocked a drawer and withdrew a thick folder labeled Drummond Defensive Protocol, the label in Nadine's own hand. Last Tuesday, UPMC Presbyterian received a formal request for your medical records specifically targeting your cognitive capacity. Why? Because someone is building a case that you are mentally incompetent. Viveka said, her voice even. The request came from attorney Boyd Kettner, acting on behalf of someone petitioning for your adult guardianship. The words nearly closed my throat. But I'm not incompetent. I know. Your wife knew too, and she anticipated exactly this move. Viveka pressed her hand to the folder. 2 months before she died, Nadine gave me detailed instructions. If anyone requested your capacity records, I was to activate an immediate defensive protocol. I sat looking at her handwriting on that folder, the protective architecture she had assembled while she was dying. What protocol? A trust structure that makes it nearly impossible for anyone to seize your assets without your consent. She walked me through documents from April 2020 as she spoke. She had transferred primary ownership of your joint assets into an irrevocable trust. You are the sole beneficiary and trustee. I am the successor trustee authorized to act only if guardianship proceedings were initiated. For 38 years, I had inspected bridges for damage that couldn't be seen from the surface stress fractures that stayed invisible until the structure gave way. Sitting across from Viveka now, I could feel every fracture in my own world cracking apart. Why did she expect this? Viveka's expression settled into something that was sympathy hardened by resolve. Because she found out someone was already planning it. Who? Before I answer that, I need you to understand what's at stake. She turned a spreadsheet toward me. Your total estate comes to roughly $1.465 million. The Cochrane Roadhouse is valued at $265,000. Retirement accounts total $820,000. Investments account for the remaining $380,000. Nadine had always handled the detailed figures. With guardianship in place, they would have legal authority over all of it, Viveka said. They'd determine where you live, how every dollar is spent, and every medical decision you face. You would have no legal standing left. The January light through the windows felt thin and cold. Who filed it? Filed? I could barely get the words out. Viveka slid a document across the desk. Petition for adult guardianship, Allegheny County Orphans Court. My eyes found the petitioner's name. It hit like a cable snapping under load. Sudden, violent, total. Broderick Michael Drummond, petitioner, relationship son. My son, my only child. The boy I taught to ride a bicycle. The man who telephoned every Sunday, who brought my grandson Theo for visits, who held me close at Nadine's funeral. This can't be right. I said the words hollow. The document was real, filed 6 weeks ago on December 3rd. I'm sorry, Viveka said quietly. Nadine found guardianship research on his computer in March 2020, Elder Law Consultations Financial Projections. He claimed it was for a client. She didn't believe him. Why didn't she tell me? She was dying, and she wanted to protect what time you had left together. She knew you'd need your strength later. Viveka's voice eased slightly. She made sure you'd have what you needed to fight. I looked at my son's name beneath a list of allegations. Cognitive decline, memory loss, emotional instability. Calculated lies everyone engineered to erase me and take possession of 43 years of our life together. The hearing is February 15th, 5 weeks from now, Viveka said. We need to go through your accounts without delay. Nadine believed he was already stealing. This petition isn't where it begins, Mr. Drummond. It's the end game. Broderick had sat smiling at Sunday dinners while constructing my legal cage around me. Now I had 5 weeks to establish my competence contest my own child and find out how far the rot had spread. The following morning, Viveka made the call I hadn't known I needed to make. If Broderick was going to claim I was incompetent, he needed evidence, and evidence could be manufactured. It had never occurred to me to audit my own medical file until Viveka said those words. They turned my blood to ice. 1 month after uncovering the petition, I found myself in a windowless conference room in UPMC Presbyterian's records department, seated alongside Viveka and Dr. Forsyth. The walls were lined with filing cabinets in the slow process of being digitized into nothing. A records clerk named Glenda sat at a terminal, her fingers working the keyboard at speed. "We need every entry in Mr. Drummond's cardiac file," Viveka said, her voice carrying the precise authority of someone who had run this play before, with metadata showing who made each entry and when. Dr. Forsyth leaned in, expression grim. "I've been his cardiologist for 4 years. If something's wrong in there, I need to see it." Glenda gave a nod and brought up my file. The printer started humming pages, feeding out one after another. My complete cardiac history since 2018, every appointment, every result, every clinical notation, laid out flat timestamps and user IDs attached to all of it. My own medical past, now ammunition in a war I hadn't known was being fought. We spent the first hour cross-checking entries against Dr. Forsyth's actual appointment schedule. Most lined up cleanly, notes composed during office hours, test results logged within minutes of coming in. Prescriptions entered right after consultations. Then Viveka's finger stopped on a page dated November 12th, 2021. "What's this?" she asked. Dr. Forsyth took the sheet and read it. Something shifted in his face. "I never wrote this." I leaned across to see. The note was written in polished clinical language. Patient displayed significant disorientation and confusion regarding medication. Regimen unable to recall current prescriptions or dosages without prompting. Exhibited frustration when questioned about compliance. Cognitive assessment recommended. The timestamp read 11:47 p.m. on a Saturday. "I wasn't anywhere near this building that night," Dr. Forsyth said, his voice measured. "I was at my daughter's wedding in Philadelphia." Viveka had her phone out and was photographing the document. Someone with system access inserted this entry 3 months ago, right when Broderick would have been building his case. The air in the room seemed to thin. "They falsified my medical records," I said. "They put lies directly into the hospital's database." "Who has access to your patient file?" Viveka asked Dr. Forsyth. "Physicians in the cardiology department, nurses on the cardiac floor, and technically any doctor with escalated privileges for cross-departmental consultation." He was already pulling up the access logs on Glenda's terminal. "But there are audit trails. Every entry is tied to a credential ID." He scrolled through the metadata. November 12th, 11:47 p.m. The entry had been made using physician credential ID 847-CC-2891. "Is that yours?" Viveka asked. "No, mine is 623-CC-1847. Dr. Forsyth's jaw went tight. "Glenda, can you look up who owns that credential?" Glenda typed quickly. A profile came up on the screen. For 38 years, I had cataloged every structural flaw I encountered, cracks invisible to the eye that could bring a bridge down under the right load. Now, I was staring at the cracks in my own life, deliberately scored by someone who knew precisely where to cut. "Dr. Wendell Pratt," Glenda read from the screen. "Behavioral health psychiatry." Dr. Forsyth's face darkened. "Dr. Pratt has no legitimate reason to be inside a cardiac patient's file. He's in the behavioral health wing, a separate department, a separate building entirely. Why would a psychiatrist be anywhere near my cardiac records?" "Bored. Imborsitstall," I asked. Viveka was already working through the guardianship petition she'd carried in. She stopped on a page and held it out. "Because he's the expert witness listed in Broderick's petition. Dr. Wendell Pratt, board-certified psychiatrist, retained to provide a professional assessment of your cognitive capacity." The name on the screen snapped everything into place with the sound of a cell door closing. "He accessed your file without authorization," Dr. Forsyth said, anger tightening his voice. "Added a fabricated entry to build a paper trail suggesting cognitive decline. Then he'll testify at the guardianship hearing that his professional opinion based on your own medical records is that you're incompetent." "Can we prove he fabricated it?" I asked. "The timestamp proves I didn't write it," Dr. Forsyth said. "And the access logs show Pratt had no clinical justification for being in your file. But demonstrating that he added it deliberately rather than through some kind of clerical error, that's harder." "Not if he has a history," Viveka said quietly. "Does he?" Dr. Forsyth's silence told me everything. "Well, Dr. Pratt has been investigated twice by the Pennsylvania State Medical Board. Once for signing fraudulent disability paperwork in exchange for cash. Once for billing Medicare for consultations that never took place. Both times he reached a settlement and agreed to supervision, but kept his license. "So he's corrupt," I said flatly. "He's desperate," Dr. Forsyth replied. "His practice is struggling, he's carrying debt, and he'll do whatever it takes for money, which makes him exactly the sort of witness someone like Broderick would go looking for." Viveka was writing in her legal pad pen, moving in fast, hard strokes. "We need to pull the access logs for Gerald's complete file going back 2 years. If Pratt made one false entry, there may be others. Every instance of unauthorized access needs to be documented." "I'll have Glenda run a full audit," Dr. Forsyth said. "It'll take a few hours." "Do it." Viveka turned to me. "Mr. Drummond, we are going to find every lie Broderick planted in that file, and then we are going to bury him with them." I looked down at that forged note at the precise clinical phrasing designed to make me read like a bewildered old man losing his hold on reality. Broderick hadn't just filed a petition. He'd purchased a doctor to rewrite my history. He'd manufactured the evidence. He'd turned my own medical records into a weapon aimed at me. "How many others?" I asked. "How many more entries did he add?" "We'll find out," Viveka said. But the question circling darkest in my mind went further than that. If Dr. Pratt was willing to falsify entries in a hospital database, what would he be prepared to say under oath at the guardianship hearing? What lies would he deliver, wrapped in professional credentials and medical authority, to persuade a judge I had lost my mind? And if a corrupt psychiatrist could be recruited to fabricate evidence, who else had Broderick brought into this? Dr. Forsyth's audit turned up 3 more fabricated entries in my file. 3 additional lies Dr. Pratt had seeded between November and January, each one worded with care to indicate cognitive decline. But proof of forgery wasn't sufficient. We needed evidence of a conspiracy. That's when Everett called. My neighbor Everett Quarry had spent 35 years as a federal postal inspector, the type of man whose training had made him attuned to patterns that most people walk right past. When he called me that March morning, his voice carried the flat, steady calm of someone passing along very bad news. "Gerald," he said, "I think you need to see something." 10 minutes later, I was in Everett's living room at 284 7 Cochrane Road. Everett Quarry, at 71, sharp-eyed from 3 decades working mail fraud investigations, occupied the tidy brick house next to mine. The professional habit of noticing what others preferred not to see had never left him. His living room reflected the same precision model trains and display cases, photographs from his Army years, and a computer setup that looked more like a workstation than anything recreational. He waved me toward the chair in front of his monitor. I had security cameras installed after someone lifted 3 packages off my porch last September. He said, pulling up a folder marked Surveillance Archives. 4 cameras, driveway, front door, backyard, and 1 covering the street. That last one catches your driveway as well. Clear line on your front door. I hadn't known he had cameras, hadn't given it a thought. "How far back does the footage go?" I asked. 6 months of continuous recording, cloud backup, local storage, automatic timestamps. Everett's hands moved over the keyboard with the economy of a man who had assembled 1,000 evidence packages. "And I've been going through every frame since you told me about that guardianship petition 3 weeks ago." He opened a video file, October 11th, 2021. "This is a Tuesday morning," Everett said, around 9:15 a.m. The image was black and white, but crisp. I watched my own driveway through Everett's camera. My truck was absent. I would have been on my way to UPMC Presbyterian for my quarterly cardiology appointment. At 9:23 a.m., per the timestamp, a gray sedan turned into my driveway. A man climbed out. I recognized him right away from the petition documents. Boyd Kettner, the attorney, 51 thinning hair, a well-cut suit. 15 seconds later, my front door swung open. Broderick stepped outside. My son came down the driveway to meet the lawyer. They shook hands. Broderick produced a manila envelope from inside his jacket and passed it to Kettner. They stood close together, heads down, speaking. The exchange ran 11 minutes by the timestamp. Then Kettner got back in his car and left. Broderick went back inside my house. "That's Boyd Kettner," I said, my voice arriving from somewhere remote. "The attorney from the petition, and that's my son handing something off to him." "I know," Everett said quietly. "Keep watching." He brought up another file, November 8th, 2021, another Tuesday. Same hour, same pattern. My truck gone. Broderick stepping out of my house, Kettner pulling up minutes behind him, another envelope, another low conversation on my driveway. Everett had devoted 35 years to tracing mail fraud schemes, following paper trails that looked meaningless until you stood back far enough to see the design. And now he was showing me the design of my own undoing. How many, I asked. 7 meetings between October and February, Everett said. All on Tuesdays, all falling between 9:15 and 10:30 a.m. Every single time your truck was gone. He pulled up a spreadsheet, 7 rows each, carrying a date, a timestamp, and notes. October 11th, envelope delivered. November 8th, documents reviewed. December 6th, extended discussion gestures indicate disagreement. January 3rd, envelope exchange handshake. 7 meetings. I said the words slow in my mouth. Always on my appointment days. Always when your vehicle was gone, Everett confirmed. I cross-referenced your calendar against every one of these dates. Every meeting took place during your quarterly cardiology appointments or follow-up visits. Broderick knew your schedule. He was using your medical appointments as his opening. I had believed my quarterly check-ins existed to keep my heart functioning. Broderick had converted them into a timetable for dismantling my independence. Everett advanced through the remaining footage. Each clip showed the same choreography, my truck departing Broderick, surfacing Kettner. Arriving conversations I was never supposed to witness, envelopes I was never supposed to know about. In the January footage, 3 weeks before the petition was filed, Broderick gestured emphatically while Kettner recorded notes on a legal pad. The timestamp showed that exchange ran 18 minutes. He knew my schedule, I said. He was turning my heart condition against me. It runs deeper than that, Everett said. Look at the progression. First meeting in October, second in November. December they were at odds over something. January they were wrapping it up. February the petition lands. This wasn't improvised. This was a campaign. He was right. The footage laid out exactly what Viveka had suspected: months of coordination, deliberate and patient. Broderick and his attorney meeting in secret while I sat in a hospital, trying to hold on to my health. They weren't just meeting, I said. They were engineering every step. Premeditated conspiracy to commit fraud. Everett said, his old federal inspector's cadence coming through. That's the correct term for what this footage shows. I've seen organized fraud operations with less preparation behind them. He ejected a flash drive and held it out to me. I burned copies to 3 drives, one for you, one for your attorney, one stays here as backup. Every clip carries the original timestamp and metadata intact. This is court-ready evidence. I took the drive and felt its weight in my palm. Proof. Concrete proof that my son had been running this operation for months. Is there more? I asked. Yes. Everett's face went darker. That's the reason I called. There's something else you have to see. He brought up footage from February 14th, 2022, a Tuesday. My truck rolled out of the driveway at 8:47 a.m. I remembered that appointment a stress test that consumed 3 hours. At 9:03 a.m., Broderick's car turned in. He walked to the front door, and then he produced a key. I watched him unlock the doorstep inside and pull it shut behind him. The timestamp ticked forward. 9:03 a.m., 9:15, 9:30, 9:45. At 9:46 a.m., 43 minutes later, Broderick came back out locked up and drove off. He was inside your house for 43 minutes, Everett said quietly, while you were at the hospital, with a key you didn't give him. I sat staring at the still frame on the screen, my son on my porch, a key in his hand, entering a house he had no right to enter. What was he doing in there? I asked. That, Everett said, is exactly what you need to determine. I spent that night going through my house looking for whatever Broderick had done during those 43 minutes. Nothing obvious was gone, nothing looked disturbed, but if he had planted something or copied something, I wouldn't know it until the moment it was used against me. My grandson Theo was 8 years old, loved math puzzles and blueberry pancakes, and had no conception of the fact that his father was using him as a messenger for threats dressed up as casual conversation. He showed up the Saturday morning in April, backpack shaped like a rocket ship, stuffed with homework and energy. Theo had his mother's dark curls and his grandfather's methodical way with numbers, and he carried the unwitting burden of being caught between 2 men who both told him they loved him. Grandpa, He dropped his bag and bolted across the room to hug me still wide open with trust. That's okay. Hey, buddy, what do you want for breakfast? Pancakes. It was always pancakes. 20 minutes later, we were at the kitchen table, the same table where I'd been going through evidence of his father's betrayal. Theo worked long division problems while I stood at the stove turning out blueberry pancakes. The ordinariness of it felt precarious, like stepping across ice is cracked. Can we go to the Science Museum this afternoon? Theo asked. They've got a new exhibit on bridges. Of course, I said, sliding pancakes onto his plate. You know your grandfather had a hand in building a few of those. I know. You told me about the Mount Lebanon overpass, the one rated at 42,000 pounds per support beam. He tipped the syrup bottle with care. Dad says I'm good at math like you. The mention of Broderick tightened something in my chest, but I held my voice level. Your dad's right about that. We ate without much talking, the silence easy. Theo worked through the rest of his math homework and held each problem up for me to check. Every answer was right. The kid was sharp in a way that went beyond his years. Can I help clean up? He asked when we were done. Sure thing. He scraped the plates while I got the water running. That's when he said it, the way a child says something with no idea of the weight it's carrying. Dad said, you just need to sign one more document and then everything will be easier for you. My hands went still on the dish towel. What document is that? I don't know exactly. Theo passed me a fork. He said once you sign the paper, you won't have to worry about bills or the house anymore. He'll take care of all of it. I kept my expression from changing. Did he mention what the paper was for? Something about making sure you're safe? Theo lifted a shoulder. He said, sometimes grown-ups need help, even if they don't realize it yet. Like when you help me with math, even though I think I already know how to do it. The words were too polished, rehearsed. Broderick had coached him. My 8-year-old grandson was carrying a threat without the faintest idea it was a threat. That's interesting, I said, keeping my tone light. Did your dad mention when I should sign this paper? He said pretty soon, maybe when he comes by next. Theo looked up at me. Are you okay, Grandpa? You seem tired. How do you tell an 8-year-old that his father is predatory without tearing apart the only stable bond the child has left? I'm fine, buddy, I said, and smoothed his hair. Just thinking about which exhibit we should tackle first at the museum. We spent the afternoon at Carnegie Science Center. Theo moved from display to display, calculating bridge load tolerances on an interactive panel. I followed and felt the full weight of what I was shielding him from. Sunday evening, after Broderick collected Theo with a grin and an easy wave, I sat back down at the kitchen table and made up my mind. I would give Broderick precisely what he was expecting to see. In 38 years of bridge inspection, I had learned how structures give way. I understood the warning signs that came before collapse, and I knew that the surest way to expose a flaw was to apply pressure in measured increments until the weakness showed itself. The most reliable method I knew for testing a bridge's integrity was controlled incremental stress. I would now apply that same principle to my son's scheme by appearing to crumble under it. I opened my laptop and searched for hidden cameras, wireless cloud-connected high definition. I found a set of 3 that looked like USB adapters and carbon monoxide detectors and ordered them with expedited shipping. Then I called Everett. I need your help with some installation work, I said. Small cameras, very small. Where? Everett's voice was steady, no trace of surprise. Study hallway living room. When do they get there? Wednesday. I'll come by Thursday morning, Everett said. Early. Thursday morning, my next cardiology appointment. The window Broderick had been using to meet with Kettner, the same window in which he had walked into my house with a key I never gave him. After I hung up, I sat in my study and began working out my performance. I would start letting things slip, small things at first, misplacing my keys, asking the same question twice, looking uncertain when Broderick mentioned dates. I'd slow my walk, let sentences drift off before they finished. Broderick wanted a frail, disoriented old man, the kind a judge could be persuaded to place under guardianship. I would give him a performance worthy of the effort. And while he watched me appear to come apart, my cameras would be recording every word he spoke, every document he tried to introduce, every angle of manipulation he attempted. I had spent my working life constructing things built to hold under pressure. Now I would become a structure that looked to be failing while quietly capturing the forces working to bring it down. The cameras arrived Wednesday in plain packaging. Everett was at my door, Thursday at 7 a.m., well ahead of my appointment. We had them installed in 30 minutes. study camera hidden in a mantel clock, hallway camera disguised as a carbon monoxide detector, living room camera built into a USB adapter plugged in beside the couch. Each one motion activated, each one pushing footage to cloud storage. Everett and I both had access audio and video high definition. At 8:30, I left for my cardiology appointment. As I backed down the driveway, I glanced toward Everett's place. He was at his window, watching, waiting. From that point on, every move Broderick made inside my home would be on record. The trap was in place. Now, I only had to wait for my son to step into it. The cameras ran quietly for 11 weeks, capturing nothing but an old man going about his solitary routine. Then, on a Wednesday afternoon in July, Broderick finally made his move. The document my son laid on my coffee table was 47 pages bound in a professional folder, engineered to present itself as something that would protect my life while being designed to strip it away. "Dad, I know you don't like thinking about this stuff," Broderick said, settling into the armchair across from me with the ease of someone who had rehearsed this. He was 42, doing well with his consulting firm, wearing the kind of expensive casual clothes that said, "I'm successful, but I'm still your son. But after your last cardiology appointment, I realized we need to get these protections in place." I looked down at the folder. The tab read, "Proxy and Care Coordination Documents." "What kind of protections?" I asked, keeping my voice easy, mildly curious. "Just standard forms." He leaned forward with a studied air of concern. "If you have a cardiac emergency and can't make your own decisions, these authorize me to coordinate with your doctors and your insurance. It's what Nadine would have wanted someone watching out for you." Bringing Nadine into it was deliberate. He knew it would lower my guard. "I've got Boyd Kettner on standby if you have any technical questions." Broderick went on, reaching for his phone. "He's the attorney handling everything. Just want to make sure you're comfortable." He dialed. 2 rings. "Boyd Kettner," came the voice through the speaker. "Boyd, it's Broderick. I'm here with my father going through the documents we discussed." "Good afternoon, Mr. Drummond." Boyd said, his tone warm and practiced. "These are entirely standard forms, medical decision-making authority and coordination with your insurance provider. Nothing out of the ordinary." I drew the folder toward me and opened it. The first page looked unremarkable enough. Durable power of attorney for healthcare decisions. Standard legal boilerplate. I turned to the second page, the third, reading at my own pace. "Take your time, Dad," Broderick said. "I know there's a lot of legal language in there." There was. Dense paragraphs, whereas clauses hereby, clauses the full architecture of professional obfuscation. But I had spent decades reading structural specifications where a single misplaced decimal separated a bridge that would stand a century from one that would come apart in a winter storm. And this document had more than misplaced decimals. It had landmines buried in the language. I found the first one on page 14, section 4, subsection C. "Attorney, in fact, shall have authority to access medical records, financial account statements related to healthcare expenses, and insurance documentation." Financial account statements. Interesting. I kept reading, page 23, page 31, and then on page 34, folded into section 7, subsection D, I found what they were actually after. "The attorney, in fact, shall possess full authority over all financial accounts, real property investment portfolios, and estate assets without limitation or oversight, for purposes of ensuring uninterrupted health care and residential stability, without limitation or oversight." I set the page down deliberately and looked up. Section 7 here, this language about financial accounts. Is that standard for a medical proxy? A pause, half a second too long. "That's simply to ensure your medical bills can be paid without delay during an emergency." Boyd said, smooth as ever. "Sometimes hospitals need immediate authorization to draw from accounts for treatment costs. This streamlines that process. It says all financial accounts and without limitation." I said, keeping my voice level curious. "That seems quite broad for medical billing." "It's protective language," Boyd said. "In practice, it would only apply to healthcare-related expenses, but the law requires broad phrasing to make sure there are no coverage gaps." I looked over at Broderick. He was holding that same expression of careful concern, but something had shifted behind his eyes, a hardness I hadn't noticed before, or perhaps I simply hadn't been looking closely enough. "This section here," I continued, turning to page 37, real property and estate assets. How does that connect to medical care? That's in case you ever need to move to a care facility, Broderick said quickly. If your condition gets worse and you need full-time care, I'd need authority to sell the house or free up assets to cover the cost. It's for your protection, Dad. For my protection while handing him unlimited reach over everything Nadine and I had built across 43 years. I closed the folder and placed it back on the coffee table. I appreciate you bringing this by, I said carefully, but I'd like to have my insurance advisor look it over first just to make sure it coordinates properly with what I already have in place. Broderick's smile locked in place. Dad, this really is standard. 3 attorneys have already reviewed it. I'm sure, I said, but I'd feel better having someone who knows my specific situation take a look, just to be thorough. Mr. Drummond, Kettner's voice came through the phone. I assure you this document has been carefully prepared. I'm sure it has, I said gently, cutting across him. But I'm going to have my advisor look at it all the same. That's just how I do things. 3 seconds of silence. Of course, Broderick said at last, his voice wound tight. Take your time, though we should really get this finalized while you're still clear-headed about these decisions. While I'm still clear-headed, a threat in the clothing of concern. I'll be in touch, I said, rising slowly, adding a slight shuffle to my step, playing my role. Thanks for thinking of me. Broderick collected the documents with movements that were clipped and controlled. I'll follow up next week, he said. This matters, Dad. Don't let it drag. He went out the front door. I watched through the window as he crossed to his car in the driveway. Then I walked to my study and pulled up the camera feeds. The living room camera had taken in everything, the documents on the table, the full conversation, Broderick's finely calibrated performance. But it was the driveway feed that gave me what I needed. Broderick stood beside his car phone, out thumbs moving fast across the screen. The careful composure was completely gone, his face twisted with frustration. The text message preview sat in the camera's frame for exactly 2.3 seconds, long enough to read, long enough to save, long enough to establish conspiracy. The old man is starting to ask questions. I watched the clip 3 times, then moved it to the encrypted drive where I kept Everett's surveillance footage. 47 pages of fraudulent power of attorney. A corrupt attorney coordinating in real time by phone. My son's unguarded rage caught in high definition. Broderick thought I was beginning to ask questions. He had no idea I'd been accumulating answers for 3 months. His next move would be more aggressive, more desperate, and I would be ready. But Broderick's next move didn't come. Not the following week. Not the week after. He went quiet, which told me he was preparing something worse. In the meantime, Vivica completed the forensic audit I should have commissioned 18 months earlier. The spreadsheet Vivica set on her conference table contained 473 rows of transactions, and every one of them was theft. I sat in her office on an August morning, staring at the document that confirmed my son had been methodically gutting me, while I extended him my full trust. The entries were color-coded: red for retirement account withdrawals, blue for investment liquidations, yellow for savings transfers. There was a great deal of red. He started in January of last year, Viveka said, running her finger down the first column. Small amounts at the outset, $3,200, $4,800, always varying the amounts and the timing to resemble ordinary retirement withdrawals for living expenses. I studied the dates. January 2021, 5 months after Nadine died, while I was still raw, still learning what it meant to come home to an empty house. Broderick had been into my accounts helping himself. I gave him emergency access, I said quietly, for legitimate needs, medical bills, house repairs, in case I was ever incapacitated. He used that access to drain you in a systematic way over 18 months, Viveka said, and the pace picked up sharply over the past 6 months. Look at the frequency every 8 to 12 days, always under $10,000, to stay beneath the bank's automatic reporting threshold. He structured it to evade detection at every step. I moved my finger down the rows. February 20, 21, $4,200. March, $5,800. April, $3,900. May, $7,200. Month after month, a slow and careful bleed calibrated to look like nothing more than a retired man meeting his ordinary expenses. Except that I covered my regular bills from my checking account. These were draws against retirement and investment accounts I rarely touched. Where did it go? I asked. 2 shell companies, First Legacy Holdings, LLC, and Summit Capital, partners both registered to the same business address, a UPS mailbox in Bethel Park. From there, the money was consolidated and routed into a corporate account. Viveka turned to the next page. Harrington Development Group, my son's commercial real estate operation. How much? The question came out hoarse. Total. Viveka looked at me with something close to pity. $820,000. The number landed like a physical blow. $820,000. More than half my retirement. More than half of what Nadine and I had set aside through 38 years of careful, deliberate living. Your total assets stood at approximately $1.465 million. Viveka continued, her voice low. He took 56% of everything you spent a lifetime building. For 38 years, I had inspected bridges for metal fatigue, microscopic stress fractures that quietly hollowed out structures until catastrophic failure arrived without warning. Now, I understood, I had been living through that same catastrophic failure for 18 months and never once saw it coming. 56%. He hadn't just taken my money. He had taken my independence, my options, my future. He stole the security Nadine and I had assembled so patiently, so deliberately, year after year after year. Can we recover it? I asked. If we can establish fraud and trace where the funds went, yes. But there's a complication. Viveka opened another folder. Several of the largest transfers, 6 transactions totaling $240,000, were authorized with signatures that don't match your signature card on file. The bank should have caught that. They didn't. Why not? Because someone overrode the system warnings, Viveka said. Someone who is prepared to testify. She pressed a button on her desk phone. Send Miss Dunlow in, please. The woman who came through the door was 34 and visibly shaking. Petra Dunlow, a single mother working as a bank teller, looked like sleep had abandoned her days ago. Her eyes were raw, her hands unsteady as she settled into the chair Viveka offered. Miss Dunlow, this is Gerald Drummond, Viveka said gently. Would you tell him what you told me? Petra glanced at me, then dropped her gaze to her hands. I'm so sorry, she whispered. I didn't know what else to do. Just tell me what happened, I said. She pulled in a shaky breath. Your son came in personally for the first few transactions. He had the correct account numbers, the right authorization codes. Everything appeared legitimate. But then in March, he began sending transfers electronically, and the signatures they didn't match your card on file. The system flagged them, Viveka prompted. 3 times, 3 separate transactions. Petra's voice dropped to barely a murmur. The system generates an alert whenever signatures don't match. I'm required to contact the account holder directly to verify. But Mr. Drummond, your son, he told me that if I flagged them, he would report you for what I asked. He said I had made processing errors on prior transactions, large ones. He showed me a file, an internal investigation report from the bank. My name on it listing mistakes serious enough to warrant immediate termination and possible criminal charges. Tears spilled down her face. I have 2 kids. I'm doing this alone. If I lost this job, I'd lose everything. So I overrode the alerts. I processed the transfers even though I knew the signatures were wrong. Petra Dunlow was 34 years old, raising 2 children on a teller's wages, and my son had converted her terror of poverty into a weapon aimed at both of us. The investigation file was fabricated, I asked. Entirely, Viveka said. The bank confirmed no such investigation ever existed. Broderick created it to coerce her into committing fraud on his behalf. He turned me into a criminal, Petra said, her voice fracturing. I processed fraudulent transfers. I could go to prison, but I'm willing to testify. I'm willing to tell the truth about what he did. I sat looking at this frightened young woman my son had manipulated into helping him rob me. And I felt something shift inside me. This had stopped being only about me. Broderick had manufactured multiple victims. He had turned people's vulnerabilities into instruments, my grief, Petra's financial desperation, and used them as tools for theft. You won't go to prison, I told her. You were coerced. You're a victim in this too. The bank has agreed not to pursue charges against Ms. Dunlow in exchange for her cooperation, Viveka said. Her testimony will be essential. Petra nodded, blotting her eyes. After she left, Vivica pulled up one more document on her laptop and angled the screen toward me. There's something else you need to see. Broderick's corporate filing records. I studied the screen. Harrington Development Group. 3 commercial properties listed. And beside each one in red foreclosure notice. Foreclosure notice. Foreclosure notice. Total liabilities, Viveka said quietly. $1.8 million. He had stolen $820,000 from me and fed it into a hole that needed nearly twice that amount to fill. The guardianship was never about care. It was about survival. His survival purchased with my destruction. Knowing that Broderick was desperate changed the entire picture. A greedy man can be negotiated with, reasoned with, managed. But a desperate man staring down total ruin that was a different threat altogether. The Pennsylvania Attorney General's office occupied 3 floors of a government building that smelled of old files and consequences, and I walked into it, already knowing I was about to learn exactly how desperate my son had become. Viveka had arranged the meeting with the state's Financial Crimes Unit 3 days after showing me the audit. We rode the elevator to the 7th floor, checked in at a security desk, and were led to a conference room where a woman with steel gray hair and keen eyes was already seated and waiting. Delia Ashford, 46. Radiating the kind of methodical calm that comes from 12 years prosecuting financial predators for the Pennsylvania Attorney General's office, laid out Broderick's financial collapse with clinical precision. "Mr. Drummond," she said, extending her hand with a grip that felt like a vice. "I've been working financial exploitation cases for 12 years. Your son's pattern is among the most systematic I've encountered." "Delia has subpoena authority," Viveka explained as we sat. "She can compel full disclosure of Broderick's financial picture, bank's loan documents, corporate filings, everything. And I have," Delia said, drawing open a thick accordion folder. "Your attorney flagged the structured withdrawals from your accounts back in July. Once the pattern was clear, I issued subpoenas to every financial institution your son has touched in the past 3 years." She spread documents across the table like evidence laid at a crime scene. Loan agreements, property deeds, foreclosure notices stamped in red ink. "How bad is it?" I asked. "How deep is he buried?" Delia pulled out a corporate filing dated March 2020. "Your son formed Harrington Development Group in early 2020. Commercial real estate acquisition. He purchased 3 properties that spring 2 small office buildings and 1 mixed-use retail space. Total purchase price, $2.1 million. Where did he get $2 million? I asked. He didn't. He borrowed it. Delia slid loan documents across to me. A private equity firm called Silverline Capital Partners. They specialize in high-risk commercial loans to first-time developers. Extremely predatory terms. I scanned the first page. The interest rate tightened my chest. 14% annually. 14%, Viveka said, reading over my shoulder. "That's usurious. It's legal for commercial loans," Delia said. "Barely. Silverline operates in a gray area. They target inexperienced developers who can't secure traditional bank financing. The terms are designed to engineer default so they can seize the properties." I had investigated bridge collapses triggered by cascading structural failure, one compromised support beam, setting off adjacent failures in a domino sequence that, once started, could not be stopped. And I was watching my son move through that exact same cascading financial collapse in real time. "What's the total debt?" I asked. $1.8 million, Delia said. "He made a down payment from his own savings, roughly $300,000. The rest is leveraged loans. His business model assumed he could renovate the properties and lease them at a profit. But Pittsburgh's commercial real estate market had been flat for 2 years. He couldn't attract tenants. Revenue never came. She laid out 3 foreclosure notices, each stamped with a different date across the top. First property goes to foreclosure October 15th, 8 weeks from now. Second property, December 3rd. The 3rd is already in default. Silverline has filed to seize it. October, 8 weeks. What happens if he can't pay? I asked, though the answer was already forming. Total asset seizure. They take the properties and pursue him for the remaining debt. Personal bankruptcy. And here's the part that should concern you most. Delia leaned forward. Silverline's loan agreements contain guarantor clauses. If Broderick had secured power of attorney over your assets and signed them as additional collateral, the lenders could have come after your home, your accounts, everything. That's exactly what he was working toward, the power of attorney document, the 47 pages of fraudulent paperwork engineered to give him unlimited access. He wasn't simply trying to take what I had left. He was trying to make me legally liable for his debts. The $820,000 he already stole, I said slowly. It didn't fix anything, did it? He poured your retirement into the hole, and it wasn't close to enough, Delia confirmed. The arithmetic was brutal. He stole $820,000, but he owes $1.8 million. He's still nearly $1 million short. Now he needs the rest. Your home equity, your remaining accounts, your life insurance policies, all of it. Viveka's expression had gone grim. And he has 2 months to get it before the first foreclosure hits. 2 months? October 15th. The same month the guardianship hearing had originally been scheduled before we pushed it back. A greedy man can be reasoned with, I said quietly. A desperate man can't. He'll reduce everything to ash before he admits defeat. Exactly, Delia said. That's why I needed to sit down with you. Financial predators come in 2 varieties, opportunistic and desperate. You can deter an opportunistic criminal. Once they realize they've been caught, they pull back. But a desperate criminal, they escalate. They take bigger gambles. They get violent. The word settled over the room. Violent. You think he's a physical threat, I asked. I think he's 2 months from losing everything he built. I think he's already robbed his own father, and it still wasn't enough. I think the only thing standing between him and complete ruin is a single legal signature. Delia held my gaze. What does a man do when he's 2 months from losing everything he built, when he's already stolen from his own father? And it wasn't enough when one legal signature is all that separates him from total destruction. I had no answer to give, but I knew my son. And I knew desperate men didn't fall back. They hit harder. Delia produced one final document, a rental agreement dated 3 weeks earlier. One more thing, she said. Last month, Broderick rented a storage unit in Bethel Park, 10 by 10, climate controlled, paid 6 months up front, $720 cash. What's he putting in there? Viveka asked. We don't know. We'd need a warrant to search it, and we haven't established probable cause. Delia looked at me. But men don't rent storage units and pay 6 months in advance unless they're planning something that needs time to play out. He's not just desperate, Mr. Drummond. He's getting ready. I drove back to Mount Lebanon in silence, Viveka beside me, working through her notes. My son was 8 weeks from financial annihilation. He'd already taken more than half my retirement, and it hadn't been enough to save him. He had a storage unit holding something I couldn't see, and he was preparing for something I couldn't anticipate. Desperate men don't retreat. They attack harder, and I had exactly 8 weeks to be ready. I couldn't get inside that storage unit without a warrant, but I could speak with people who knew Broderick's history, people who had already survived him. The woman sitting across from me in a suburban cafe 20 minutes from my neighborhood was my son's ex-wife Theo's mother, and she was trembling so badly her cup rattled against the saucer. Renata Corwin, 36, carrying the careful composure of someone who had endured years of psychological warfare, was Broderick's ex-wife Theo's mother, and a marketing director who had spent 7 years trying to put what my son was capable of behind her, until she learned he was doing it again. Thank you for coming, I said quietly. She glanced toward the cafe entrance for the 3rd time in as many minutes. Miss Langford said you needed to understand Broderick's history. She said, her voice low. She said you'd guarantee my safety if I testified. Viveka leaned in. The NDA you signed as part of the divorce doesn't extend to testimony in a criminal investigation. You're legally protected, and we can arrange witness security protocols if that's what it takes. Renata's laugh was hollow. You don't understand. Broderick doesn't need to break the law to dismantle someone. He just needs to convince you that he might. I recognized the tone, the same fear I'd witnessed in Petra Dunlow, the same brand of psychological warfare. Tell me what happened, I said. Renata drew a breath, held it, let it go slowly. I told myself I'd never say any of this out loud again. He made me sign an NDA as part of the settlement. I got Theo, he got favorable custody terms and no criminal charges. But when Miss Langford told me what he's doing to you, her hands tightened around the cup. It's exactly what he did to my parents. Your parents. During our divorce in 2015, we'd been married 5 years. Theo was 3. Broderick had just launched his consulting business, and it was hemorrhaging money. We separated in March, filed in April. By June, things turned ugly. She drew a manila folder from her bag, worn at the edges, something kept hidden for years. My parents helped cover my divorce attorney's fees. Broderick found out and decided they owed him something. She opened the folder. Inside court documents, emails, bank statements. He forged my father's signature on a power of attorney document. Renata said, her voice level, now the words long rehearsed. Used it to access my parents' joint savings account at Key Bank. Withdrew $4,700 across 2 transactions. When my father caught it and reported it, Broderick claimed his attorney had made an error, said they'd been copying signatures from legitimate filing documents and the wrong form had gone through by mistake. Viveka was already scanning the court filings. The judge didn't buy it. No, Renata said. But she couldn't establish criminal intent. Broderick's lawyer was skilled. They framed it as a clerical error, argued Broderick never intended to withdraw money, that it was his attorney's paralegal who processed the transactions without proper oversight. Renata's jaw set hard. The judge issued a reprimand. No criminal charges. My parents got their money back minus legal fees, and Broderick walked away having learned exactly how to forge POA documents without getting caught the next time. She produced a printed email chain, but I kept these emails between Broderick and his attorney from May 2015 before the forgery. Viveka read aloud, "The old man won't notice if we keep it under 50,000. His wife handles the accounts anyway." That's consciousness of guilt. He knew precisely what he was doing, Renata said. It was never a mistake. It was calculated theft, and he nearly got away clean. I stared at the documents at the signatures that didn't quite match at the paper trail of a crime that had been waved off as administrative error. He studied that failure, I said slowly. This time, he constructed a medical justification, first forged hospital records, a corrupt psychiatrist to establish cognitive decline. He made the guardianship look necessary before ever reaching for power of attorney. He's more patient now, Renata agreed, sharper, 7 years of refinement. Renata was 36 years old. She had rebuilt her life after escaping my son, and here she was, sitting across from me, putting everything she'd built at risk, because she recognized the pattern and refused to let it consume another family. Why now? I asked. After 7 years? Her eyes filled. Because if I stay quiet, he destroys you. And eventually, that destroys Theo. Your grandson loves you. You're the only steady grandfather figure in his life. And Broderick, she stopped, swallowed. After the divorce, he made quiet threats about custody, about my career, about what he could do to my reputation if I ever talked. He never threatened violence outright, but the psychological pressure was relentless until I gave him the custody arrangement he wanted. You were afraid, I said. I'm still afraid, she whispered. But I'm more afraid of what happens if he succeeds. If he gets hold of your assets, if he proves this approach works, if he learns he can keep doing this to people. She looked at Viveka. You said you can protect me. Witness security protocols. Viveka confirmed. And if he attempts any form of retaliation, it becomes witness intimidation. That's a felony. I had spent my career reading structural patterns, stress fractures appearing in predictable sequences, failure modes repeating themselves across different bridges. My son was a structural pattern of predatory behavior, cycling back every time financial pressure mounted. Renata reached for a pen. What do I need to sign? Viveka slid a sworn affidavit across the table. Renata read it carefully, her hand unsteady, but her voice firm when she finally spoke. He's done this before, she said, signing her name at the bottom. And I can prove it. That has to carry weight in court. It has to. We left through separate exits, Renisa through the back, Viveka and me through the front. Security protocol. But as I reached my truck, Renata appeared one last time, stepping out from the shadows beside the dumpster. Mr. Drummond, she called softly. I stopped. You need to know the POA forgery in 2015 wasn't his first attempt. Her face was pale under the parking lot lights. It was just the first time he got caught. He'd been practicing. The implication hung in the air like smoke. How many others had Broderick successfully defrauded before anyone noticed? Renata's warning stayed with me. How many times had he done this and walked away clean? The answer came 3 days later in an unmarked envelope. It arrived at Viveka's office with no return address, a single page, an invoice from Hillcrest Memory Care Center, showing that my son had reserved a bed for me 6 months before he ever claimed I needed one. I sat across from Viveka in early October, staring at the document, The invoice was dated March 14th, 2022. Line item private suite reservation deposit. Amount $500 non-refundable. Payer Broderick M. Drummond. Patient name Gerald Drummond. March 3 months before Broderick requested my medical records from UPMC Presbyterian. 6 months before he filed the guardianship petition. Someone sent this anonymously, Vivica said, turning the envelope over in her hands. Probably a staff member with a conscience. No fingerprints, no note, just this. He paid to have me locked away before he'd even begun assembling the fake medical evidence, I said slowly. This isn't reactive, Viveka said, her voice hardening. This isn't a son frightened about his father's decline. This is premeditated confinement. The facility name was printed across the top in clean professional lettering. Hillcrest Memory Care Center. Specialized Alzheimer's and dementia services. Secure memory wing, locked doors, residents who couldn't leave on their own. Call them, I said. I need to know exactly what he told them. Viveka dialed. The call went on speaker. Hillcrest Memory Care Center. This is Leona speaking. Good morning. My name is Vivica Langford. I'm an attorney representing Gerald Drummond. I believe your facility received a deposit from Mr. Drummond's son earlier this year in March. A pause. I'm not sure I'm able to share patient information. Mr. Drummond is not a patient, Viveka cut in smoothly. We have reason to believe the reservation was made fraudulently. Mr. Drummond is present with me and authorizes disclosure. Another pause, then, please hold. 2 minutes of elevator music. Then a new voice. This is Leona Burkett, admissions coordinator. Leona Burkett, 43, and visibly uncomfortable in a professional way, was the woman who had kept careful notes about Broderick's unsettling advance reservation because something about prepaying to lock up a supposedly healthy father had struck her as deeply wrong. I remember Mr. Drummond's son. He toured our facility in February. What did he tell you? Viveka asked. He said his father was experiencing worsening confusion and memory loss. He wanted to look specifically at our secure memory care wing, the unit, where residents require staff escort to move about. He asked about our restraint protocols and our policies around restricting visitor access. My hands tightened on the desk. Did he indicate when he planned to bring his father in? Viveka asked. He said once the court approved the guardianship. He seemed entirely confident it would go through. Leona's voice fell. He'd already chosen the room. Room 147, a private suite in the secured wing. That's why he put down the deposit to guarantee that particular room would be held for him. I had designed scores of bridges with the expansion joints, controlled spaces engineered to let a structure flex under stress without catastrophic failure. My son had built a trap with no expansion joints, no margins. Just a locked room and a plan to erase me from my own life. Did anything about the interaction concern you? Viveka asked. Yes, Leona said without hesitation. Families almost always bring the patient on tours. They want to see how their loved one responds to the environment. But Broderick came alone. He asked about moving someone in quickly after approval and whether visitor access could be restricted if necessary. The whole exchange felt off, like he was arranging to warehouse someone who had no say in the matter. Did you document this? I made notes in our system. It's unusual to accept a deposit that far in advance, especially without any medical emergency. Families typically reach out to us when there's an immediate need, not 6 to 9 months ahead, while supposedly preparing legal proceedings. That's not how this normally works. Would you be willing to provide those notes and testify if it came to that? Viveka asked. If it helps stop something wrong from happening, yes. After Viveka ended the call, I sat without speaking, holding the invoice. Room 147, private suite, secured wing, $8,200 per month. My son had selected the exact dimensions of my intended captivity. He picked out my room, I said quietly. He toured a facility, chose a locked unit, paid cash to hold it. He did all of that while we were still sharing Sunday dinners, while I was still driving him to the airport, while I was still buying Theo birthday presents. This establishes premeditation, Viveka said. Combined with Renata's testimony about the 2015 fraud, Petra's statement regarding the forged signatures, the surveillance footage from Everett, the medical records tampering, we can dismantle his guardianship petition and pursue criminal charges. She began pulling out legal forms, her movements precise and purposeful. I can have a comprehensive counter petition ready in 3 days. We lay out everything, the theft, the forgery, the witness coercion, the advanced facility reservation. We file criminal complaints with Delia Ashford's office at the same time. We bury him in evidence. Do it, I said. This moves us from defense to offense, Viveka cautioned. Once we file, Broderick will know we've been building a case. He'll know about the witnesses, the documentation, all of it. He may escalate. He's 2 weeks from his first foreclosure deadline, I said. If we hold back now, he'll do something reckless. At least this way we control when it happens. Viveka nodded. No more defense. From here, we attack. She began drafting that night. I sat across from her and watched the legal language take shape, comprehensive, devastating, engineered, to expose every facet of Broderick's fraud and set both civil and criminal proceedings in motion. We worked until midnight. Viveka was finishing the final section when my phone rang. Everett, you need to get home right now, he said, his voice tight. Your son is at your house. He's not alone. He brought a moving truck. I was already on my feet reaching for my coat. What's he doing? I don't know, but whatever it is, it's moving fast. And Gerald, he has 3 men with him, professional movers. They're loading things from inside your house. Viveka was already closing her briefcase. I'm coming with you. We ran for the elevator. My son was at my house with a moving truck 2 weeks before his foreclosure deadline, the same night we had decided to go after him legally. He was making his move, and I had no idea what he was taking. I arrived home that October night to find Broderick standing in my driveway beside a rental truck, 3 professional movers frozen mid-motion with boxes from my study. Everett's camera had captured everything. So had mine. Broderick left when I threatened to call the police. He'd been trying to remove the original financial documents, the ones that proved the theft. 1 month later, we were ready to fight back. The conference room Viveka had converted into a war room held 18 months of my son's systematic fraud, spread across 3 tables, 2 whiteboards, and a timeline that ran 16 feet along the wall like a diagram of structural collapse. Table 1, Financial Crimes. Viveka said, gesturing left. Bank statements documenting the structured withdrawals. Petra Dunlow's testimony about the forged signatures. Total documented theft, $820,000 over 18 months. Everett stood beside the second table. Table 2, Fraudulent Medical Documentation. Dr. Pratt's fabricated entries. The access logs proving unauthorized file manipulation. Dr. Forsyth's testimony confirming the notes are false. Odette Farnham, the paralegal. Viveka had assigned to track every court filing pointed to the third table. At 52, she had spent 2 decades following legal paper trails and possessed the kind of methodical precision that surfaced patterns others walked right past. Table 3, Witness statements and pattern evidence. Renata's affidavit about the 2015 fraud attempt. Leona Burkett's notes from the memory care reservation. Everett's surveillance footage of 7 coordination meetings between Broderick and Boyd Kettner. I moved slowly from table to table, looking at 18 months of my life reduced to evidence. The surveillance footage alone shows systematic coordination, Everett said. But set alongside Petra's bank testimony and the memory care reservation, it's airtight. Odette drew out a folder. I've flagged every suspicious court filing Broderick made. The pattern reaches back further than we realized. I found preliminary guardianship documents, research requests, template downloads filed as early as August 2021. August 2021, 14 months ago. I was helping him move into his new office that month, I said quietly. We spent an entire Saturday hauling boxes. He bought me lunch. While researching how to legally erase you, Viveka said flatly. She crossed to the timeline wall, a wide printed banner mapping 18 months of Broderick's scheme, each date and action supported by evidence. August 2021, preliminary guardianship research. October 2021, first structured withdrawals from your retirement account and initial memory care facility tours. March 2022, $5,000 deposit to Hillcrest Memory Care Center to hold your room. May 2022, Dr. Pratt begins planting forged medical records. July 2022, Broderick attempts to get you to sign the fraudulent power of attorney. September 2022, formal guardianship petition filed. For 38 years, I had documented bridge failures, producing comprehensive reports that established precisely when, where, and why a structure gave way. And now, I was staring at a comprehensive report of my son's systematic attempt to bring down my life. Every theft, every forgery, every lie documented and dated, Viveka continued. The court will see exactly how long he spent planning to erase you. 18 months of premeditation, Everett said. That's not impulsive elder abuse born from misguided concern. That's a conspiracy to commit financial exploitation on a criminal scale. I stood before the timeline reading my life from August 2021 through the present laid completely bare. Every Sunday dinner with Broderick while he was stealing from me. Every time I drove him to the airport. Every birthday present I bought for Theo while his father was forging medical records to have me declared incompetent. The counterfiling is complete, Viveka said, lifting a thick document from the table. What comes next stopped me cold the first time I understood the full scope of it. Not just what had been done, but how long it had been in motion and how carefully it had been hidden. Before we get there, tell me this. If you discovered someone close to you had been quietly working against you, would you confront them directly or build your case in silence first? A motion to dismiss Broderick's guardianship petition with prejudice. Evidence Appendix 327 pages. Criminal referral to Delia Ashford's office. Civil fraud complaint. Motion for restraining order. 6 months of work reduced to a stack of documents sitting between us on the table. Viveka placed the filing in front of me. There's no undoing this once it goes in. Broderick will learn we've had people watching, documenting, recording. Every witness, every exhibit, every frame of footage, he'll know all of it. He'll know the trap has closed. He's got 1 week before that first foreclosure hits, Everett said. The man is cornered. We file regardless, I said. Waiting only hands him more time to do damage. Viveka agreed. Before you authorize this with your signature, she stopped, looked at Everett and Odette. Could you two step out? They went without a word, pulling the door shut. Viveka crossed to the far corner of her office where a floor-standing vault sat that I'd never once seen her touch. She worked the dial, slowly hauled the door open, and brought out an envelope sealed and thick the paper, the kind that costs something. Notarized. Official. What is that? I asked. Nadine didn't build just one layer of defense, Viveka said, her voice dropping. Dr. Forsyth's letter was the alarm. It told you the assault was coming. The irrevocable trust was the wall around your assets one Broderick couldn't scale, even if a judge handed him guardianship. She placed the envelope on her walnut desk squarely between us. But Nadine didn't stop there, she said. There's a third mechanism. It arms itself the instant Broderick's petition meets formal opposition. 2 years gone, and yet standing there in that office staring at evidence of something Nadine had arranged without ever telling me, I felt her closer than I had since the morning she left. What had she seen coming that I hadn't? I asked. The trust guards the money. I know that. She didn't stop at guarding it, Viveka said. She set a snare, and we're about to trigger it. What kind of snare? Viveka turned the envelope so I could read the typed label on its face. Drummond Irrevocable Trust. Defensive Protocol Addendum to be opened upon contest of guardianship, sealed April 18, 2020. April 2020, 8 weeks before Nadine died. She had mapped out what Broderick would do and when. She had known which lever to pull at each stage, and she had hidden one final mechanism where I'd never think to look. We have everything we need to file, Viveka said. But your wife left you something first. Read it and you'll see why Broderick's scheme was over before it started. Viveka broke the seal. That small sound paper giving way on the last thing Nadine had ever prepared for me landed somewhere I didn't expect. The document was dated April 18th, 2028 weeks before she passed. By then, she could barely manage the walk from dialysis to the parking lot without stopping to rest. But her thinking had been as precise as ever. Viveka read aloud. Drummond Irrevocable Trust Defensive Protocol Addendum. Upon filing of any guardianship petition alleging mental incompetence of Gerald Drummond, all trust assets shall immediately transfer to lockdown status, requiring independent verification from 3 separate court-appointed financial examiners before any withdrawal, transfer, or liquidation may proceed. I need you to explain that in plain language, I said. It means a win for Broderick buys him nothing, Viveka said. The full estate freezes the moment his petition is formally contested. 3 independent examiners have to unanimously confirm your incapacity before a single dollar moves and you are demonstrably not incompetent. You have spent 6 months orchestrating a counter-operation against a sophisticated fraud. No examiner alive would certify that mind as impaired. She read on. Every examiner must work independently. All 3 must reach the same conclusion before the freeze lifts. And any whiff of fabricated records or fraudulent documentation extends the lockdown with no expiration. She engineered it so the theft attempt becomes its own undoing, I said slowly. The moment someone tries to have me declared incompetent, the thing they want vanishes behind a wall. That's exactly right. Viveka lowered the document. Broderick dropped $5,000 on a memory care bed. He took over $800,000 from me. He manufactured medical records from scratch. He paid a psychiatrist to lie under oath. And if the judge rules in his favor anyway, he collects zero. The elegance of it stopped me cold. While I was guiding Nadine into clinic chairs 3 mornings a week, watching her endure it all, she was quietly encasing me in something impenetrable. Every bridge I'd ever inspected had redundant load paths, secondary structures that engaged automatically when the main span began to fail. Nadine had built that same redundancy into my life, and it was engaging right now. Viveka wasn't finished. Any effort to reach those frozen assets through deception triggers an automatic referral to state and federal financial crimes investigators. The trust language itself commands full cooperation with law enforcement. She embedded the prosecution mechanism inside the document. She didn't just fortify your estate, she booby-trapped it. Whoever reaches for it sets off their own exposure. I read the paragraph myself, recognizing Nadine's hand in the architecture of every sentence. She had war-gamed this. The petition, the falsified notes, the hired attorney, the methodical draining of accounts, she had seen it all and outflanked it. Broderick staked his whole operation on getting his hands on my assets, I said. But Nadine had already made that structurally unreachable. From the day he filed, Viveka said he was contesting a battle your wife had settled years ago. I turned to the last page. Beneath all the legal provisions Nadine had written in her own hand. Black ink letters, shaky but deliberate. She had been failing fast by April, but she meant every word to land. Gerald, if you're reading this, it means I was right about what Broderick would do. I'm sorry I couldn't tell you while I was alive. I couldn't bear to watch you carry that, knowing our son was capable of this. I couldn't stop him from trying, but I made sure he fails. You built bridges that held up the world. I built this to hold up you. I love you. Keep going. N. I read it twice. Then something gave way in me entirely. 68 years old, seated in a law office holding words from a woman 2 years in the ground. And I wept the way a person weeps when they finally understand how completely they were loved. Viveka didn't move from her spot near the door. She just let me have it. When I could speak again, I said she saw what Broderick was becoming before he'd taken his first step. And she made sure I'd still be standing when it was over. She didn't miss a single move, Viveka said quietly. The money, the forgeries, the court filing, she had a counter ready for each one. My son is trying to wipe me from my own life, I said, and the person stopping him has been gone for 2 years. I folded Nadine's note and tucked it into my wallet next to the photograph from our 40th anniversary. Next to the things I kept close to remember myself. Viveka waited until I was steady. Then she slid the counter filing across the desk, 327 pages. The moment this lands at the courthouse tomorrow, the lockdown engages, she said. Broderick can fight the guardianship for weeks and get nothing for it. Even if a judge sides with him, the estate doesn't move. He loses. I looked at the filing, then at Nadine's note folded behind a photograph. His plan was dead on arrival, I said. He spent 18 months building something that was already beaten. He just hasn't been told yet. Tomorrow, Viveka said, he will be. My son had laid his entire scheme on top of my wife's death, counting on her absence to leave me exposed. But Nadine had used her final months to build something he could never find a seam in. When we filed the counter petition tomorrow, every wall she'd constructed would rise at once around what he'd come to take. Broderick believed he was up against me. He had no idea what he was actually up against. Against Nadine, the outcome had never been in doubt. We filed the next morning. Broderick knew by that afternoon. 2 days after that, he came to my house and did something desperate. I returned from Viveka's office to find the living room ransacked, my heart medication gone from where I kept it, and my 8-year-old grandson in tears in the hallway shaking, because he'd watched his father stage a scene intended to look like his grandfather was losing his grip on reality. But I'm getting ahead. Broderick came at 4:30 on a Wednesday. I was in my study when I caught the sound of a key entering the lock, the key I'd never asked him to return, the emergency key. Theo came through the door, first his backpack shaped like a rocket ship, swinging off one shoulder. Grandpa He sprinted across the room. "Hey, buddy." I pulled him into a hug, watching over his shoulder as Broderick stepped into the doorway. "Dad, I thought Theo and I might spend some time with you this weekend," Broderick said, careful, measured. "Just family." I settled back into the frail act I'd been keeping up for months, a slight shuffle, a softening of the voice. "Of course. That's real nice of you to bring him by." Broderick smiled the same smile he'd worn while forging my medical records, draining my retirement account, touring locked memory care facilities. "Why don't you head upstairs and rest?" he suggested. "You look worn out. Theo can work on his homework down here, where it's quiet." I nodded slowly, performing confused but cooperative. Yes, I suppose I am tired." I climbed the stairs with deliberate effort, making each step look like a small burden. Behind me, I heard Broderick settle Theo at the kitchen table. "Stay here and work on your math. Don't bother Grandpa." I reached the landing and kept moving, but not toward my bedroom. I stopped where the staircase angle gave me a clean sightline down into the living room, while the shadows kept me hidden. Broderick waited exactly 5 minutes. I watched him check his watch twice. Then he rose from the couch and stood in the middle of my living room, eyes moving across it the way an engineer surveys a job site before starting demolition. What he did next, I will never forget as long as I live. He stepped to the bookshelf and swept an entire row of books onto the floor. Then he went for the reading lamp, the one Nadine had bought at a church rummage sale 20 years ago, and sent it toppling. The ceramic base exploded against the hardwood. He put over the coffee table scattered magazines across the floor, stripped the cushions from the couch. In my career, I had documented structural failures caused by falsified inspection reports, bridges that gave way because someone had lied about the concrete mix or the quality of the welds. And here I was, watching my son falsify the inspection report on my life. Broderick drew out his phone and began photographing working the angles, overturned furniture, scattered books, the shattered lamp base. He was murmuring as he moved, and I caught pieces of it. Confused, agitated, tore up the living room, looking for something he couldn't remember. He moved into the kitchen, drawers sliding, cabinets banging. Then he returned holding my medication bottle, the heart pills I took twice a day for my arrhythmia. He examined the bottle for a moment, then it disappeared into his jacket pocket like it cost him nothing. "Perfect," he muttered. "This is exactly what Dr. Pratt said to document." He kept shooting the chaos, the manufactured wreckage of a violent and confused episode that had never occurred, proof he intended to place before a corrupt psychiatrist who would testify that I was displaying precisely the kind of dangerous deterioration that demanded immediate institutionalization. I stood at the top of those stairs and watched my son build a case against my sanity, and every second of it was being captured by the 3 hidden cameras Everett and I had mounted 2 months earlier. Then Theo appeared in the kitchen doorway. He stopped. He looked at the destruction at his father standing in the wreckage of my living room with his phone raised. "Dad?" Theo's voice was small. "What happened?" Broderick turned. For half a second, something crossed his face, calculation or a cold internal decision. Then he arranged his features into something soft and sad. "Grandpa had an episode," he said quietly. "He got confused and thought someone was stealing from him. He did all this, but he doesn't remember now. We're helping him. We're documenting what's happening so the doctors can understand it." Theo looked at the destruction at his father, at the shattered lamp. He was 8 years old, but he was sharp, and I could see in his face that something didn't sit right. "I didn't hear anything," Theo said. "I was right there doing math. It was quiet the whole time." "He can be very quiet during these episodes," Broderick said, steady and smooth. "That's part of what worries us. He has no awareness of what he's doing." Theo's eyes filled. Broderick finished his photos, put his phone away, and left, 20 minutes later taking Theo with him. He told me to rest and not concern myself with the mess. "I'll come back tomorrow to help clean this up." The instant his taillights disappeared, I went downstairs. Theo's math worksheet was still on the kitchen table. Half the problems done, a child trying to hold his focus on long division, while his father committed crimes one room away. I called Everett. He arrived in 5 minutes, and we pulled the footage, crystal clear on every camera. Broderick arriving, the calculated wait, the methodical destruction, the photographs, the medication vanishing into his pocket, the muttered reference to Dr. Pratt. Theo stepping into the doorway, Broderick's lie delivered without a tremor. Theo was 8 years old and had just been handed a lesson about what his father was willing to do. A lesson that would leave a mark no matter how this legal fight ended. He staged a crime scene, Everett said, watching the footage. That's evidence tampering, criminal evidence tampering. And he used his own son to sell it, I said. And I have every frame in 1080p with timestamps. I made 3 copies that night, one for Vivica, one for Delia, Ashford at the state attorney's office, one for my own records. Broderick had committed evidence tampering, theft of prescription medication, and child endangerment, all documented on camera. But when I went to record exactly which pills he'd taken, I opened the bottle he'd left on the counter, the one he must have swapped out after pocketing mine. The pills were white and round, not my heart medication. I brought one to the light, aspirin, plain over-the-counter aspirin. Broderick hadn't only hidden my pills to manufacture evidence. He'd replaced my cardiac prescription with aspirin. Had I taken them the next morning as usual, my arrhythmia would have gone unmanaged. At 68 with my condition, that gap in treatment could have produced a cardiac event. My son had not merely tried to frame me, he had tried to kill me. I called Delia Ashford at 6 in the morning with the aspirin bottle and the camera footage in hand. By 9, she had called an emergency meeting. By noon, the machinery of the state had engaged. The Pennsylvania Attorney General's office operates with the kind of bureaucratic precision that transforms individual crimes into case numbers, witness statements into exhibits, and desperate sons into defendants. They moved on Broderick with exactly that force. 3 days later, I sat in Delia's office in Philadelphia while she walked me through what the grand jury had authorized. 23 subpoenas approved this morning, Delia said, sliding a document across her desk. Your son's financial existence is now an open record to the state. Bank accounts, corporate ledgers, every exchange with Boyd Kettner, Dr. Wendell Pratt's, complete patient files. Phone records, email servers, all of it. Viveka sat beside me, working through the subpoena list. How long until a formal indictment? Typically 6 to 8 weeks, Delia said. But medication tampering that risked cardiac arrest in a 68-year-old man with documented heart disease, we can move faster. 2 weeks, perhaps. 3? What charges are we looking at? I asked. Elder financial exploitation felony level, evidence tampering, theft of prescription medication with intent to endanger, conspiracy to commit fraud, forgery, perjury for the fabricated medical records. Delia counted them off on her fingers. Combined exposure, 12 to 20 years in state prison. 12 to 20 years, my son staring at a sentence reserved for violent offenders. The grand jury reviewed the footage of him staging your living room, Delia continued. They watched him pocket your medication. They heard him lie to his own child. 3 jurors asked whether we could bring child endangerment charges for what he put Theo through. We're weighing it. I thought of Theo weeping in my hallway. Don't, I said. That boy has been through enough already. Don't put him on a stand to testify against his own father. Delia nodded. Your call, but the remaining charges hold, and there's something else. She produced another set of documents. As of this morning, the state has placed emergency asset freezes on every account connected to Broderick Drummond. Personal checking, personal savings. Harrington Development Group, corporate accounts. The shell companies that received your stolen money. Legacy Holdings and Summit Capital Partners. Everything locked down, pending the criminal proceedings. He can't reach any of it, Viveka asked. Not a cent. We've effectively rendered him insolvent pending trial. He can't move, money can't draw on credit lines, can't liquidate anything. Delia's expression was one of cold professional satisfaction. We've also placed him under active monitoring. Not arrest, the indictment hasn't come down yet, but surveillance to ensure he doesn't run or destroy evidence. His foreclosure deadlines, I said. Did Silverline take the properties lost too, already to Silverline Capital Partners? The third goes to auction next week. The $1.8 million in debt remains, and he has nothing left to satisfy it. He is financially destroyed. I had watched controlled demolitions of compromised bridges precisely place charges that brought down failing structures in careful sequence with no collateral damage. The state was executing the same controlled demolition on my son's life with identical methodical precision, which makes him more dangerous, not less, Delia said. A man who's financially cornered and facing criminal charges will do desperate things. We're watching him, but you need to stay careful. No contact, no confrontations. Let the process run. I nodded, though I kept turning over the same question. What move did Broderick have left? He'd already used everything: theft, forgery, fabricated medical files, staged evidence. What was left? 2 days later, I got my answer. Viveka called me into her office with news that shifted everything. The guardianship hearing, she said, holding up an official notice. It's been scheduled. December 8th. How far away is that? I asked. 1 week from today, she placed the notice on her desk. Judge Dorinda Albrecht will preside. Both sides will present their evidence. The hearing had originally been designed as a formality in Broderick's favor. A corrupt psychiatrist, a handful of forged medical records, and a judge who'd never heard your side of it. But now it had turned into a real fight. Can we win? The question felt both absurd and urgent at once. We had video evidence of crimes. We had witness testimony. We had a pattern of conduct stretching back 7 years. We have him on camera committing multiple felonies. Viveka said, we have Dr. Forsyth prepared to testify that the medical records are fabricated. We have Petra's testimony about the bank fraud. We have Renata's affidavit covering the 2015 pattern. We have Everett's surveillance footage. We have the nursing home reservation proving he planned this in advance. Yes, we can win. But he's desperate enough to try anything inside that courtroom, and a desperate man becomes unpredictable. December 8th, 2022, 9 a.m. Allegheny County Orphans Court. Judge Dorinda Albrecht, presiding the date and hour that would decide whether I walked out with my freedom or lost everything I'd spent 68 years building. What happens if he wins, I asked, though the answer already sat in my stomach like a stone. If he somehow persuades Judge Albrecht you're incompetent in spite of all our evidence, he obtains guardianship. But the instant that ruling lands Nadine's trust, lockdown activates. The entire estate freezes. He'd hold legal authority over you, but have zero access to the money, and the criminal charges would still move forward. So even if he wins, he eventually loses, though he might delay prosecution long enough to run. Or he finds some angle we haven't spotted yet. That's why we need a decisive victory. I studied the hearing notice. 1 week, 7 days to prepare for a confrontation that had been 18 months in the making. I'll be ready, I said. That night, Viveka called again. Her voice was clipped and tight. There's been a development, she said. Broderick has brought in a new attorney. Boyd Kettner is out. He's facing disbarment proceedings and can no longer represent clients. Broderick's new lawyer is Gareth Linwood. Very expensive, very capable. One of the top guardianship litigators in Pittsburgh. How expensive $50,000 retainer, at minimum plus hourly rates that could run another $30,000 to $40,000 for a contested hearing. I did the math, but Broderick's accounts were frozen. The courts had effectively bankrupted him. How was he paying for any of this? That, Viveka said quietly, is exactly what I can't figure out. Someone was bankrolling Broderick's final stand, and we had no idea who. We never did find out who was funding his new attorney. By the time we tried to trace it, the hearing was 24 hours away, and the mystery had stopped mattering. What mattered was that my son, confident in his expensive lawyer and his manufactured evidence, made one last mistake. He showed up at my door at 7:30 on the night before the hearing that would determine my freedom. He carried a bottle of wine and wore the expression of a man who was certain he had already won. "Dad," he said when I pulled the door open. I wanted to talk before tomorrow. Just the two of us, no lawyers, no drama father to son. I let my shoulders sag, shuffle back to let him inside, and played the frail old man he'd come expecting to find. Tomorrow. Oh, the court matter. Yes, that's tomorrow, isn't it? It is. He set the wine on my kitchen counter, but left it unopened. This was no social call. I'm worried about you. This whole process, it's going to be stressful. I'm not sure you understand what's coming. I made my way slowly to the living room and lowered myself into my armchair with exaggerated effort. My phone sat on the coffee table between us, its audio recording app already running. Pennsylvania is a one-party consent state for recordings. I was that one party. I understand there's a hearing. I said, my voice careful and vague. Vivica explained some of it. Something about capacity. Right. Capacity. Broderick settled on the couch, elbows braced on his knees, leaning forward, the concerned son pose. Dad, the court is going to evaluate your ability to manage your own affairs. Medical experts will testify. Financial records will be examined. It's going to be difficult. Difficult. How embarrassing, he said, picking the word deliberately. There will be testimony about confusion, memory lapses, trouble managing finances, things you probably don't want aired in a public courtroom. I blinked slowly and let uncertainty drift across my face. But I'm not confused. I know you don't feel that you are. That's part of the problem. He reached toward me as though he might take my hand, then pulled back. Dad, I'm offering you a way out, a dignified solution. What kind of solution? If you withdraw your objection tonight, we can avoid the whole courtroom ordeal. Just sign the consent form. Let me handle your finances and move somewhere you'll be safe. Hillcrest Memory Care Center has a beautiful private room waiting for you. You could be settled in by next week. The nursing home. The very room he'd reserved 9 months earlier. But I don't want to leave my house. Dad, you don't have a choice. His voice hardened briefly, then softened again when he caught himself doing it. Tomorrow, a judge is going to declare you incompetent. You'll lose everything regardless. Your house, your bank accounts, your independence, all of it disappears, whether you fight or not. I'm offering you a dignified exit rather than a public humiliation. For 38 years, I had performed structural load tests, applying calculated stress to bridges to identify exactly where they would fail. Now I was running the same test on my son's conscience, pressing with questions until the truth cracked through the surface. What about my money, I asked. Will I still have access to my accounts? I'll manage them for you. Make sure your bills are paid, your needs are taken care of. The money you borrowed, will I get that back? The question hung between us for 3 seconds. Broderick's mask slipped. It's complicated, Dad. How is it complicated? I needed to restructure some things. Business investments that required capital. Your accounts had capital sitting idle. I borrowed it temporarily. How much does it really matter? Once I'm your guardian, I can fix everything. Your money covers my obligations. My obligations stop threatening your security. Everybody wins. But you didn't ask me, I said, letting genuine confusion color my voice. You just took it. You wouldn't have understood the financial mechanics. You would have said no. He was speaking faster now, the practiced gentleness giving way to something raw underneath. That's exactly why you need a guardian, Dad. You can't see the big picture. You can't grasp complex financial strategy. You would have let your money sit in accounts, earning nothing, while my business collapsed and pulled us both down with it. How much did you borrow enough to save the business? Enough to keep everything running. The exact figure doesn't matter, but will I get it back? Once guardianship is in place, it all becomes one pool of resources. Mine, yours. Managed together. The distinction becomes meaningless. Meaningless. My life savings, meaningless. And tomorrow, I asked what happens tomorrow. Tomorrow the judge signs the order. I become your legal guardian. We move you to Hillcrest by Friday. You get settled. I consolidate the finances. Life goes on. He had called me Dad 17 times in that conversation. 17 times using that word while laying out precisely how he planned to steal everything I'd built and warehouse me in a memory care facility to bury the crime. I'm tired, I said, letting my voice fracture slightly. I think I need to rest. Tomorrow is a big day. It is. Broderick stood. Think about what I've said. You can still withdraw the objection in the morning. Just tell your attorney you're willing to accept the guardianship. Save yourself the humiliation. He moved toward the door and paused. I love you, Dad. He said it. I'm doing this because I love you. Then he was gone. I sat in my armchair for 10 minutes staring at my phone. The recording had captured all of it. Broderick's admission that he'd taken money without permission. His statement that guardianship would render the line between his finances and mine meaningless. His description of using my assets to cover his own obligations. A confession complete and admissible. I forwarded the recording to Vivica at 9:47 p.m. with a single message. He confessed to everything. Play this tomorrow, she replied 3 minutes later. This is admissible. This ends him. Get some sleep tomorrow, you win. But I didn't sleep. I sat on the back porch until sunrise wrapped in Nadine's green cardigan I'd given her for their 35th anniversary, thinking about the son I had raised and the man he had become. Thinking about the moment 18 months back when he decided his father's life was worth less than his debts. Thinking about Theo, who would grow up knowing his father had tried to erase his grandfather. The sun came up over the Allegheny River, cold and clear. December 8th, the day everything ended. Tomorrow came. The Allegheny County Orphans Court smelled of floor polish and dread. And when I walked through those doors at 8:45 on the morning of December 8th, I was carrying 18 months of evidence against my own son inside a leather briefcase. Viveka met me in the hallway outside courtroom 3B. She was already dressed for War Navy suit hair, pulled back briefcase that looked heavier than mine. "Ready?" she asked. 18 months, I said. "I've been ready." We arrived a quarter hour early, and Broderick was already at the petitioner's table with Gareth Linwood beside him. Linwood, 52, wore an expensive tailored gray suit and the look of a man in the wrong courtroom. White-collar criminal defense was his specialty. Probate court was foreign territory, and defending a case scaffolded on fabricated psychiatric records was not something his career had prepared him for. Viveka had flagged him to me after Broderick brought him on board. Corporate fraud securities violations that was Linwood's world, not elder law. An odd fit unless Broderick understood he was defending conduct that was at its core criminal. My son never looked up when we walked in. That told me enough. Viveka laid a document on the clerk's counter that made the woman pause, counterfiling in the matter of Drummond. Viveka said, 94 pages plus exhibits. The clerk thumbed through it. "Miss Langford, this is substantial. Elder financial exploitation demands thorough documentation." The clerk stamped it, logged it, and took it back to the judge's chambers. Across the room, Linwood leaned in and said something fast and urgent to Broderick. The color left my son's face. At exactly 9 a.m., Judge Dorinda Albrecht took the bench. 62 years old, silver-haired, 14 years in probate court, she had seen family greed wearing every available disguise, and she could identify it on sight. "Good morning," she said, opening her binder. "I understand there are competing filings before the court." Both counsel approach. Viveka and Gareth Linwood stood at the bench. I couldn't hear the exchange, but I watched Judge Albrecht open Viveka's counter, filing eyebrows rising. She moved through the pages, carefully stopped, read moved, further, read longer. 5 minutes. Then I need to review these materials before testimony begins. 30-minute recess. We rose. Broderick looked at me then, for the first time all morning. Whatever was working behind his face, he kept it controlled. His hands were less cooperative. 33 minutes later, Judge Albrecht returned, and something in her bearing had changed. The professional neutrality she'd carried in had gone cold underneath. "We'll proceed. Mr. Linwood, your case." Gareth Linwood called Dr. Wendell Pratt. The man took the stand and delivered his prepared account with practiced fluency. 3 evaluations marked cognitive impairment, disorientation to date, and place poor recall medication confusion. All of it fabricated. All of it entered into forged records planted in my file. "In your professional opinion," Linwood asked, "is Mr. Drummond capable of managing his own affairs?" "No," Dr. Pratt answered without hesitation. "He needs immediate structured care." Viveka did not cross-examine. She called me instead. I walked to the stand, took the oath, and swore to tell the truth, something I had been doing for 18 months while my son manufactured lies around me. "Mr. Drummond," Viveka said. "Your full name, age, and occupation for the record." Gerald James Drummond, 68 years old. 38 years as a bridge inspector with the Pennsylvania Department of Transportation. What does that work involve? I had explained structural failure to juries more times than I could count, how minor compromises compound into catastrophe. Now I was explaining the same principle with my son as the subject. Load-bearing capacity, I said. Material fatigue, foundation stability. When a foundation cracks, you catch it early or pay for it later. When calculations are off, you document it. When someone falsifies the strength of a support cable, people die. Accuracy isn't optional, neither is honesty. Viveka asked me to walk through the principles of suspension bridge design. I did 5 full minutes, exact figures, technical language, the fluency that only 4 decades of real expertise produces. Judge Albrecht stopped looking at her notes. She was watching me. "Mr. Drummond, Yes, Viveka continued. Dr. Pratt claimed you showed confusion about your medications. Name your current prescriptions and their purposes. Metoprolol, 50 milligrams twice daily for cardiac arrhythmia. Atorvastatin 20 milligrams once daily for cholesterol. Aspirin 81 milligrams daily for cardiac protection. I should also tell the court that my metoprolol was recently removed from my organizer and replaced with aspirin by someone other than me, a substitution that could have caused serious harm. I logged it the same day and reported it to the state attorney's office. Gareth Linwood stood. Objection non-responsive and inflammatory. Overruled, Judge Albrecht said. I want to hear this. Continue, Mr. Drummond. My prescribed cardiac medication was removed and swapped for an over-the-counter substitute. I reported it, and there is an active investigation. Broderick lurched to his feet. That's not sit down, Mr. Drummond, Judge Albrecht said flatly. Your attorney will call you if he wants your testimony. Viveka turned back to the bench. Your Honor, I'd like to introduce Exhibit C from our counter filing the Memory Care Reservation Agreement. Judge Albrecht already had the page open. Her jaw tightened as she read. Mr. Linwood, carefully neutral. Your client secured a memory care bed in March 2022. Dr. Pratt's own records don't show a cognitive episode until May. Explain that sequence. Linwood rose with the posture of a man who'd rehearsed an answer he no longer trusted. Your Honor, the family was prudently anticipating future needs based on relevant history. Anticipated on the basis of what diagnosis? There was none. Judge Albrecht's eyes went cold. This court does not look favorably on institutionalization, planned before any medical basis existed for it. She pulled the bank forensics exhibit. Her gaze stopped on a single line. Deposit paid, March 14th, 2022. First alleged cognitive episode, May 9th, 2022. Gap, 56 days. She said it aloud. 56 days. Your client paid $5,000 to hold that bed, 56 days before any physician claims to have seen the condition requiring it. Linwood sat down without answering. Judge Albrecht set the filing down and looked directly at Broderick for the first time. She had come in expecting to referee a family matter. Her face said she now understood she was looking at elder abuse. Mr. Linwood, she said quietly, I will hear from every witness Miss Langford has listed. Every single one. Everett Quarry took the stand first. For the next 90 minutes, I watched my son's scheme dismantled witness by witness, methodically, with no gap left to escape through. Everett laid out the surveillance 7 meetings between Broderick and Boyd Kettner, every one of them timed to my clinic appointments. Whenever Mr. Drummond was at the doctor, Everett told the court envelopes changed hands. Viveka put the footage on the screen. Broderick, unmistakable, no ambiguity, standing in my driveway with his attorney while I sat across town having my heart examined. Gareth Linwood passed on cross. Dr. Forsythe followed. The forged entry bore a timestamp of 11:47 p.m. on a Saturday. I did not write that note, he said steadily. I was off duty. I was in Philadelphia at my daughter's wedding. Dr. Wendell Pratt had used his credentials to access my file and plant a fraudulent clinical record. Gareth Linwood passed on cross. Odette Farnham presented filing records tracing Broderick's guardianship research back to August 20 to 21, 16 months of deliberate preparation, downloaded forms, documented consultations. A paper trail that made spontaneous family concern impossible to claim. Gareth Linwood passed on cross. Petra Dunlow's hands shook when she took the oath, but her testimony was steady. She described the falsified signatures, the fraud alerts she had been pressured to override the fabricated compliance file Broderick had placed in front of her to guarantee her silence. He told me I'd lose my job and face criminal charges if those transactions got flagged, she said. I have 2 children. I was terrified. Gareth Linwood passed on cross. Leona Burkett confirmed the reservation. March 14th, 2022, $5,000. Non-refundable room 147 in the locked unit where no resident leaves without escort. Minimal outside contact per the client's instructions. 6 months before any guardianship petition was filed. 6 months before any physician documented a single sign of decline. Correct, she said, when Viveka pressed it. Gareth Linwood passed on cross. Pillar by pillar, it came down: the coordinated surveillance, the planted medical entries, the bed reserved. Ahead of any diagnosis, the money moved without permission, the timeline that made the plan visible and indefensible. By noon, nothing was standing. Then Viveka rose. Your Honor, one final exhibit. A video deposition recorded by Nadine Drummond in April 2020, preserved under her defensive trust protocol. Judge Albrecht nodded. The lights went down. The screen at the front of the courtroom came on. And there was Nadine. My wife propped in her hospital bed, the robe I'd brought her around her shoulders, worn thin by illness, but completely unmistakably present. The camera found her face, and she met it head on. My name is Nadine Marie Drummond. Her voice was quiet and it carried. I am 65 years old and I am dying, but I am not confused, and I know exactly what my son will try to do to my husband. Not a sound moved in that courtroom. Broderick came to see me during my dialysis on March 12, 2020. Nadine continued. He brought papers with him. He said they were insurance forms. He waited until I was at my most vulnerable with Gerald, out in the parking lot, to push those papers in front of me. I asked to look them over before putting pen to paper. They had nothing to do with insurance. What he was holding were financial power of attorney documents, instruments that would have surrendered control of our joint accounts to him. 2 years had passed since my wife's death. Yet sitting in that courtroom, her face on that screen, and her voice carrying every word with such steadiness and tenderness, I felt closer to her than I had on any day since I'd lost her. Something settled in me then, that love and loss don't cancel each other out, that a person can guard someone even from the other side of death. I wouldn't put my name on those papers, Nadine said on screen, and I knew that once I was gone, Broderick would make another move. He'd bide his time until there was no one left to stand between him and Gerald. These protections are what I built in my place. She had turned her gaze straight into the lens, and across 2 years and a courtroom screen, it landed on me. Gerald, if this recording is playing for you, it means I read him correctly. It means Broderick went ahead and filed. It means he's coming for your independence and everything you've earned. But here you are, still on your feet, still in the fight. The tears came without warning. I let them. You spent a lifetime building bridges sturdy enough to carry the weight of the world, Nadine said. Everything I've done here was to carry you. Don't stop now. I love you. Always. The screen went dark. The room brightened. I stayed in my seat, face wet, while around me not a single person made a sound. Then Broderick lurched upright. He doesn't need $14 million, he burst out, voice fracturing. He's 68 years old, rattling around alone in that house on top of a fortune he'll never touch. I was drowning, and he'd have never even felt it. Gareth Linwood seized his arm. Broderick, sit down. I was $1.8 million in the hole. The foreclosures were already in motion. That money was the only way out, and he would never have known the difference. Mr. Drummond? Judge Albrecht's voice was flat and hard. Sit down. I suggest your attorney walk you through how what you just said qualifies as an admission of financial exploitation. Broderick folded back into his chair and pressed both hands over his face. Judge Albrecht turned toward the court reporter. Strike that outburst. She stopped herself. No, let it stand. It goes to the heart of this matter. She drew a document from her folder, clearly prepared in advance. 30 seconds of writing. Then her eyes came up. Petition for guardianship is denied with prejudice. Grounds fraud, manufactured evidence, and predatory financial exploitation of an elder. Mr. Gerald Drummond is restored to full autonomy over his person and his estate. The complete record, every exhibit, every word of testimony, and the proceedings of this day is forwarded to the Allegheny County District Attorney for criminal prosecution. This court is adjourned. The gavel came down at 12:42 p.m. on December 8, 2022. That sound carried everything: the ruin of my son's scheme, the return of my freedom, and the arrival of a reckoning he had worked for 18 months to escape. At 1 o'clock that afternoon, I stepped out of the courthouse, a free man, my life and my finances entirely my own again. Delia Ashford intercepted Broderick at the courtroom exit and told him plainly that he was under formal investigation and could expect criminal charges within 10 days. I didn't glance back once. Things moved fast after that. The wire transfer confirmation registered at 9:47 a.m. on December 10th. $820,000 returned in a single electronic instant. I was seated in Delia Ashford's office on the 16th floor of the Justice Center, watching figures fill her laptop screen. Each number stood for a piece of 15 months of deliberate theft. Funds parceled out across 17 separate accounts while my son performed the role of a concerned child. Every dollar was traced by the state's forensic team, Delia said, working through the recovery report. 17 accounts in total, some stateside, some he tried to push overseas. Overseas, he had moved to wire $240,000 into a Cayman Islands shell corporation the morning after he filed for guardianship. The emergency freeze caught it within a day. I was still absorbing the shock of Nadine's letter when Broderick had already been trying to hide $240,000, somewhere the courts couldn't reach. Delia laid out the sequence for me. Retirement funds back within 48 hours. Investment accounts whole again by the week's close. The $5,000 nursing home deposit on its way back too. These are the final acceptance documents, she said, pushing papers across the walnut conference table. I signed without hesitating. Through the wall of windows, December had painted the Pittsburgh skyline in shades of pewter and ash. Every dollar recovered, every account settled. A win tallied in routing numbers and balance confirmations. Yet, I didn't feel like I'd won anything. It felt like an absence. Nadine's words from the recording kept returning to me. Whatever happens, Gerald, remember you are the man who repairs what's broken. But the truth was, I hadn't repaired a thing. Something precious had been broken, and surviving the break isn't the same as mending it. 3 days on, I found myself in a bare hearing room in Philadelphia there to witness Boyd Kettner's career come apart at the seams. The Pennsylvania Supreme Court Disciplinary Council chambers had the particular atmosphere of a place where reputations come to die, all fluorescent light and institutional dread. 3 board members occupied an elevated bench, documents spread before them, while Boyd's attorney tried to construct a plausible story. Mr. Broderick Drummond misled my client entirely, the attorney said. He had no idea those medical records weren't legitimate. Delia got to her feet. The board should look carefully at Exhibit 12. Folders opened. I tracked the board members' faces as the material registered. What you're looking at are phone records, Delia said. 23 calls logged between Mr. Kettner and Mr. Broderick Drummond from May 3rd through May 18th, the identical stretch of time during which false medical entries were being inserted into Gerald Drummond's file. 23 calls. Mr. Kettner was not deceived. He was a participant. Boyd's attorney sat mute. The board withdrew for 18 minutes. The lead member read their finding aloud upon returning immediate disbarment, permanent loss of his license to practice law in Pennsylvania, and a criminal referral on charges of fraud and conspiracy to commit elder financial abuse. Boyd Kettner had pulled in $185,000 a year processing guardianship petitions. That income was gone. Prison up to 10 years of it was now the realistic horizon. I watched him cross that hearing room threshold as a defendant, not a lawyer. The man who had tried to use the courts as a weapon to cage me now caged himself by those same courts. What I felt wasn't what I'd anticipated, not sympathy. Something colder, grim earned satisfaction. The particular feeling that surfaces when a person who turned the system into a weapon gets consumed by it. I hadn't expected to take quite so much pleasure in watching it happen. December 15th brought Delia back on the phone, summoning me to her office for a final debrief. The court approved our motion to seize Broderick's business accounts, she said. Drummond Strategic Solutions, LLC is dissolved emergency order. The moment the trial coverage hit his clients evaporated. The office lease is gone, the leased Mercedes repossessed, country club membership pulled. One by one she named the pieces. Broderick's entire professional identity stripped away in 5 days. The $1.8 million owed to Silverline Capital Partners hasn't gone anywhere, Delia said, and he no longer has a salary to chip away at it. What comes next? The DA is building the criminal case. She spread a prosecution summary across the desk. Attempted financial exploitation of an elderly person, felony 3 to 8 years. Conspiracy to commit fraud, felony 2 to 5 years. Forgery felony, 6 to 18 months per count. Perjury for the fabricated medical records. She held my gaze. Combined exposure, 12 to 20 years in state prison. 12 to 20 years. At the maximum, Broderick would shuffle out at 62. The DA would like your thoughts, Delia said, picking her words carefully. Victims in elder abuse cases can weigh in on sentencing. There's no obligation, but the door is open. What's your recommendation? I said. Maximum, he targeted his own father, systematically. That's predatory behavior. She let a beat pass. But you're the one who was harmed. Your voice carries real weight here. What did I actually want? I stared at the summary on the table. My son's future reduced to charge categories and year ranges. How soon do you need an answer? Monday, December 18th, first thing. The drive home was quiet. I pulled into my driveway, crossed to the front door, the same door Broderick had let himself through, without invitation to plant his fabricated evidence. The same door he'd come through a fortnight ago, carrying a bottle of wine and a mouthful of lies. There was a manila envelope in my mailbox. I tore it open. A sheet of construction paper fell out a crayon drawing. One stick figure marked, Grandpa, gripping a fishing pole. Another marked, me, planted right alongside. Behind them, the Allegheny River in streaky blue crayon. Across the top, Theo's lopsided 8-year-old print, my grandpa. I went in and hit play on my voicemail. Grandpa, it's Theo. I miss you. Dad says you're really mad at him. I don't understand what happened. Can I still come see you? Mom says maybe not for a while, but I don't know why. I miss you. Bye. Midnight, kitchen table, 2 pieces of paper in front of me. The DA's summary maximum sentencing recommendation. 20 years. Broderick would be an old man on the other end of that. Theo would be 28, his entire boyhood swallowed by his father's absence. Against that one crayon drawing, my grandson, who could spend an afternoon happily working through a math problem or dropping a line in the water, who adored his grandfather and understood none of the destruction his father had set in motion, only that the 2 people he loved most had gone quiet toward each other. Delia needed my answer Monday morning. 48 hours, justice or mercy, the full weight of punishment or something else entirely. 38 years walking bridges had taught me something about load-bearing decisions. I'd spent a career learning to read structural failure, to catalog collapses, document what gave way and why. But nothing in those 38 years had prepared me for the only question that actually mattered now. What does a man of 68 who gave his working life to building things do when the only path forward demands he decide what to tear down? That question arrived on a Sunday morning, carried in an 8-year-old's voice through the telephone. Grandpa, do you hate my daddy? I was standing at my kitchen table on December the 17th, the prosecution summary in one hand, and Theo's crayon drawing in the other, and those 2 pieces of paper suddenly felt like verdicts pulling in opposite directions. My grandson's voice came through the speaker, thin and uncertain. Mom says he did something really bad to you, Theo went on when I didn't speak right away. I don't hate him, buddy, I said, dropping into the chair. I'm just trying to work out what's right. A silence followed, the kind that carries genuine weight, even from an 8-year-old. Then, can people who do bad things still be good dads? That question went through the careful architecture of my anger like a demolition charge. I had spent weeks constructing a case for maximum prosecution, 20 years in prison, absolute total cold-served justice. But Theo's voice was carrying a truth I had been choosing not to look at. Destroying Broderick completely meant putting this child through something he'd never recover from watching his father vanish into the criminal system for 2 decades. Total victory on my end meant losing my grandson on the other. Come over this afternoon, I told him. We'll have lunch. He showed up 2 hours later, dropped off by Broderick's ex-wife Renata, with a curt nod at the door. Theo came bounding up my porch steps with a backpack shaped like a rocket ship, his dark hair pushed up in the same stubborn cowlick that Broderick had battled his entire childhood. We heated up tomato soup and grilled cheese sandwiches and sat at the kitchen table playing cards. Theo talked non-stop about 3rd grade and a science project he was doing on bridges. The irony wasn't something I pointed out. He didn't mention his father until we were cleaning up. Grandpa, he stopped at the sink, sudsy water dripping from a plate. Is Daddy going to jail? I don't know yet, I said, which was honest. His eyes, Nadine's eyes, scaled down and set in a younger face, studied me with a gravity that didn't belong to his age. Would it make you happy if he did? And there it was, the question that exposed everything my pursuit of justice was going to cost. I could go after maximum sentencing, watch Broderick sentenced to 20 years, recover every dollar and every fragment of my dignity. But I'd be doing it by making myself the instrument of this boy's destruction. The grandfather who chose vengeance over the child standing in the crossfire. Monday morning, December 18th. I rang Vivica Langford at 7:45, 15 minutes before the deadline. I want to file a victim impact statement requesting leniency. I said, without opening pleasantries. I'm withdrawing from the civil fraud claim separately, and I want the DA to understand I'm not pushing for the maximum. Mr. Drummond, the criminal prosecution belongs to the DA now. The judge already made the referral. That process isn't yours to halt. I understand that. But victims can ask for leniency. I can tell the DA I'll cooperate with a plea agreement rather than demand trial. I can request they consider reduced charges in exchange for complete restitution and a signed admission of wrongdoing. That's still within my rights. I let a beat pass. I also know his 8-year-old son asked me yesterday whether a person who does bad things can still be a good father. Viveka's voice shifted, softened. What terms are you after? Everything except prison, permanent forfeiture of all inheritance rights, a lifetime restraining order with one exception, supervised visits with Theo, full relinquishment of any custody standing, a signed affidavit admitting what he did, but I don't press the criminal charges. Gerald, she said my first name for the first time. This is an extraordinary degree of mercy. I looked out at the cold December light falling across the Allegheny River. I spent 40 years building bridges, I said. I'm not going to blow one up simply because I have the explosives. 4 decades on bridge decks had taught me that the strongest structures aren't the ones that hold rigid against every force. They're the ones with enough give to survive what the storm throws at them. Absolute rigidity is how things shatter. I'd understood that principle in steel and cable and reinforced concrete my whole working life. Now, I was applying it to my family's wreckage. And if I strip everything from him, I added, I'm taking Theo's father away for his entire boyhood. That isn't justice. That's just a different kind of damage. Viveka drafted the settlement terms that afternoon. By Tuesday evening, Gareth Linwood had reviewed them and confirmed Broderick would put his name to them. Wednesday afternoon, December 20th, we gathered in Vivica's office at Gulf Tower, 47th floor. Pittsburgh stretched out below, through the floor-to-ceiling glass, the city I'd given 4 decades to one span at a time. Broderick came in, looking hollowed, his suit creased, his face drawn, his eyes carrying the particular exhaustion of a man who had lost comprehensively. His career was rubble, his reputation gone. He owed $1.8 million he had no means to repay, and now he was about to sign away his inheritance. We sat across the walnut table from one another like generals at a peace agreement neither had wanted to reach. Mr. Drummond, Viveka said, formally addressing Broderick, please initial each forfeiture clause and sign the final page. He picked up the pen. I watched his hand tremble slightly as he initialed the first clause, permanent forfeiture of all inheritance rights to Gerald Drummond's estate, valued at approximately $1.465 million. Then, the second lifetime restraining order, with the sole exception of supervised visits with minor child Theo Drummond. Then, the third admission of attempted elder fraud by means of a fraudulent guardianship petition. When he reached the final page and signed it, something inside him seemed to give way. He set the pen down and for the first time since walking through the door, met my eyes directly. You're letting me off easy, he said. His voice had almost nothing in it. I don't understand why. I signed my name beneath his. The pen felt heavier than anything I ever carried onto a bridge deck. I'm not doing it for you, I said quietly. I'm doing it because Theo asked me yesterday if I hated you, and I need to be able to tell him no. The confusion that moved across his face told me everything. He'd anticipated the full force of my rage because he had never truly known me at all. I had spent 40 years as the man who built things, who repaired what was broken, who worked out load-bearing capacity and structural integrity with patience and care. Broderick had apparently concluded I was the sort of man who destroys when destruction is available to him. He left without another word. Gareth Linwood gathered the documents and followed him out. The door clicked shut with the finality of a period at the end of a long sentence. I walked out of Gulf Tower 20 minutes later, settlement folder under my arm, into air so cold it scraped the throat. My money was back. My independence was secured. My son was permanently disinherited and legally barred from coming near me unsupervised. I had won. but driving home past the snow-blanketed construction site where I'd helped build the Mount Lebanon overpass back in 1986, hands measured on the wheel, I came to understand that one thing remained before this story could properly close. Something Nadine would have seen immediately. Something about what you build from the rubble once the demolition is finished. The loose porch step had been rattling for 3 months. On New Year's Eve morning, I finally got down on my knees with a level and put it right. That was the last thing. The thing Nadine would have understood. I pulled back the damaged board at 7:30 a.m., frost still laced across the railings. The wood beneath had gone soft, where water had worked its way in. Over time, a slow, quiet failure I'd left unattended while my life was being taken apart around me. I examined the joist beneath with the same unhurried attention I'd brought to 10,000 bridge inspections. Load-bearing capacity adequate. Structural integrity sound once the compromised section was out. Some repairs you can't hand off to someone else. Some you need to make with your own hands to confirm they still remember how. I was fitting the replacement board when Everett Quarry's truck turned into my driveway at 9:15. He stepped out, holding 2 paper cups, watched me work for a full minute before saying anything. "Step looks solid," he said finally. "You always did good work." I took the coffee and sat back on my heels. 40 years on bridges, figured one porch step was within reach. Everett lowered himself onto the second step, with the deliberate economy of a man whose joints have cataloged every winter they've endured. We sat without talking, 2 men of 68, who had both come through their sons' betrayals drinking coffee while the December cold settled into our faces. "Some things are worth fixing," Everett said eventually. "Some aren't. You knew which was which." I pressed the new board into place, checking for gaps along the seam. "Took me longer than it should have. You got there." We finished it together, Everett holding the board true while I drove the screws with the precision of someone who knows that good work is itself a form of dignity. When we were done, I stood on the step and put my full weight on it twice. It didn't give. It didn't shift. That was when I understood I hadn't fixed the step, because it needed fixing. I'd fixed it because I needed to know that Broderick hadn't taken that from me, the capacity to build, to make something whole with my own 2 hands. That part of me was still intact. Everett walked out at 10:30, and the handshake between us said what neither of us could put into words. I spent the afternoon at my desk, working through the layers of what Nadine had quietly built to protect me. The letter she'd written from her hospital bed 3 weeks before the end. The irrevocable trust she'd drawn up and signed without a word to me, knowing I'd have pushed back at what it implied about our son. The video she'd recorded when sitting upright was already a struggle, forecasting with grim precision everything Broderick was going to try. Every page went through the scanner time-stamped. Originals into the fireproof safe alongside our marriage certificate and her death certificate. More than record-keeping. This was tending to her foresight, holding intact the love she'd mapped out in advance. "You read the cracks before I ever noticed them," I told the empty room. "You always knew where things would give." I lifted her letter one more time and read the opening aloud. "My dearest Gerald, if you're reading this, Broderick tried exactly what I feared. But you're still standing, aren't you?" "Yeah, Nadine," I answered the paper in my hands. "I'm still standing." A bridge inspector learns this before almost anything else. It's never the unyielding steel that holds the structure together. It's the joints, the ones that give a little, absorb the blow, and keep bearing the load. When Nadine set up that trust, she built flex into my foundation, room to take the hit without coming apart. I slid her letter into the safe, swung the door shut, turned the lock. Evening settled in with the particular quiet of New Year's Eve that held breath between what's been and what hasn't arrived yet. I sat at the kitchen table laptop, opened December dark, pressing against the glass, and pulled up Nadine's video testimony one final time. Her face on that screen was hollowed by the cancer, but the eyes were still sharp, the same intelligence that had seen past Broderick's performance years before it ever registered with me. She wore the green cardigan I'd given her for their 35th anniversary, and her voice had the deliberate calm of someone making a record for proceedings she'd never attend. If Broderick approaches you about managing your finances, about guardianship, about any transfer of control, it's not concern, Gerald. It's calculation. He's been planning this since the diagnosis. I'd returned to this recording a dozen times through the legal battle. Tonight, I received it as benediction, not evidence. Whatever happens, Gerald, remember, you're the good man who fixes broken things. Don't let him break what we built. The video reached its end. Nadine closing with that quiet smile that meant the necessary thing had been said and nothing more was needed. The frame locked on her face held in digital stillness. I pressed my palm flat to the screen to that frozen expression and held it there before shutting the lid. A benediction, a thank you, a farewell that took 15 months of fighting to earn the right to receive. Some bridges don't span 2 riverbanks, I said to the closed laptop. They carry a man back to the dignity that was taken from him. I built that one, Nadine, from the plans you left me. The mantle clock read 11:47. 13 minutes. I pulled on my jacket and stepped out onto the front porch. My boot landed on the step I'd repaired that morning, and it held firm proof my hands still understood their work. The Allegheny River stretched dark and wide past the rooftops. In the distance, the first fireworks broke open their light, catching across snow and water. I had no desire to go back inside and watch the countdown by myself. I stood right there on the porch I'd fixed in the house I'd kept holding, the dignity I'd reclaimed, and let it settle. Nadine's greatest gift wasn't the protective trust or the assets Broderick never touched. It was proving that dignity can't be taken, only given up. I never gave it up. More fireworks lit the sky. 11:58. 2 minutes before a year I'd never forget became a year I'd outlasted. Thank you for the foundation, I said, to the night sky, to Nadine, to the cold December air. I'll hold it steady from here. The old year dissolved into light above the river. Gerald Drummond didn't set out to fight a war. He just refused to lose one. What this whole ordeal cost him is something no court judgment can fully account for. The years he should have spent at peace, the grief that got tangled up in legal strategy, the son he had to look at across a courtroom and accept for who he really was. I believe God doesn't waste suffering, that even the cruelest seasons have a way of refining what's left standing. For Gerald, what was left standing turned out to be enough. More than enough. These are the father stories that don't often get told, the ones about quiet men who absorbed blow after blow and still didn't let go of who they were. Gerald's story is one of those. Call it Dad's revenge if you want, but what I saw was something quieter than revenge. It was restoration. Here is what I took from it. If someone is pushing hard to take control of your life, ask yourself who benefits. Concern and calculation can wear the same face. Document everything even when it feels like overkill. The paper trail Nadine left behind saved Gerald when nothing else could have. Dignity is yours to keep or surrender. It cannot simply be taken. Guard it accordingly. If the person you built your life with saw something in you worth protecting, honor that. Don't let anyone convince you it was misplaced. If this story moved you, I'd be grateful if you shared it with someone who might need to hear it. A parent, a neighbor, a friend who's been made to feel small. Leave a comment below and tell me what stayed with you. And if you haven't already subscribed to His Hidden Revenge so you don't miss what's coming next. Thank you for being here. Take good care of yourself.